Hello there, and welcome to the planet's memory, a place where questions drift as slowly as clouds, and science is given room to be both curious and kind. Tonight, we will begin a long, gentle journey into one of the most haunting thoughts humans have ever carried. What if Earth itself already knows how the story ends? Not as prophecy, not as prediction, but as something written quietly into its own body, into stone, into water, into the silence between epochs. If the planet remembers, then every fossil, every grain of sand, every isotope tucked deep in the crust might be less an artifact and more a syllable in a language we are still learning to read. When you look at a mountain, it feels eternal. But mountains are only pauses in a story of motion that outlives our small sense of time. They lift, they crumble, they rise again. Their grains are washed by rivers toward the sea, pressed into layers, folded back into the earth through subduction until they melt into fire and begin again. In every stage they change, but they do not forget. Rocks are not storytellers in the way humans are, but through their chemistry and their scars, they still say, "This has happened," and it leaves a mark. The mark waits, unhurried, until someone comes close enough to notice. Consider the record of fossils. Shells turned to stone, forests crystallized into mineral ghosts, the bones of creatures sealed beneath mud. These are not living voices, but they are not silent either. They hold shape beyond death. They tell us an animal breathed here, walked here, lay down here, and that then something ended. We prize these remnants not because they explain everything, but because they remind us that even endings leave a trace. If endings already leave so much behind, then perhaps Earth does carry the memory of its own last horizon. Perhaps the soil beneath our feet is not just dirt, but a book of slow chapters yet unread. And if we step deeper into science, the same feeling waits. Within the atmosphere, isotopes hold patterns of vanished climates. Ratios of oxygen atoms speak of temperatures millions of years past. Carbon captures the breath of forests that once swayed where deserts now rest. The chemistry of stone becomes a clock, ticking without urgency, whispering ages into sequences we decipher grain by grain. It is not magic. It is geology. But the effect feels as close to magic as science tends to allow. The proof that a planet remembers more than we think it should. There is humility in realizing that our own history, our buildings, our stories, our devices, are only as permanent as the stone they sit upon. Entropy ensures that every structure falls eventually, that every mark dissolves unless pressed into something more enduring. And yet even entropy, even the slow unraveling of order, is part of memory itself. The breakdown of bone into dust is how bone joins soil, how soil joins rock, how rock joins future time. Loss is not nothing. Loss becomes evidence. You might wonder then, if Earth already encodes the end of whole species, whole climates, whole oceans, could it already carry, somewhere in its deep crust or its dark mantle, the memory of how even the planet itself will end? Not imagery, not words, but perhaps a pattern. Some rhythm of decay or cooling or burning that has long since begun its slow march forward. Maybe the final chapter already waits in the structure of iron, in the silence of water that will one day evaporate, in the slow thickening of the sun's light as it grows old nearby. And if memory is there, what does it mean? Is Earth alive enough to recall? Or is it only us, with our human sense of story, who turn sediment into narrative, who turn isotope trails into time machines? Could it be that Earth holds everything but understands nothing of what is held? Or could it be that, in its own patient, geological way, it understands more than we do, because it has more time to think than any creature that walks its surface? From this angle, the landscape feels less like scenery and more like archive. Hills become shelves of stone, forests become temporary scribbles, oceans transform into hard drives of salt and silt that stretch back to the dawn of atmosphere. We keep asking these questions not because they can be easily answered, but because every time we lean into them, we hear echoes. Not clear words, just a kind of resonance, as if the Earth hums quietly under everything, carrying the layered weight of its past. If endings leave marks, if memory hides in stone and dust and isotope, then nothing is ever truly erased. Not civilizations, not climates, not even worlds. Everything seeps into the next form, lingering as trace or impression. Somewhere, buried or dissolved, it waits. Maybe unfindable, maybe unreadable, but still present. And that should make us pause gently tonight. Because if Earth already holds within itself such deep memories, then our own small place in time may be less about making new chapters than finding where we are inside the ones already written. And yet, if the Earth can remember this much, if so many endings are inscribed invisibly into its body, then perhaps we should ask, what does it choose to forget? Maybe the answer lies, not in dramatic upheavals, but in the slowest of movements, the patient changes that almost escape our notice, the quiet sculpting of time itself. When we look at a valley, we see only a landscape, serene and complete. But the valley is an incision, a wound shaped by rivers wandering for millions of years, carrying stone as if it were dust, folding the surface into a story we almost never pause long enough to read. A canyon wall looks silent, but with every layer it speaks of floods, of droughts, of forests that once stood where deserts breathe now. The river does not carve because it wishes to. Carves because gravity calls it onward, not once, but forever. Not because it hurries, but because it cannot stop. Wind, too, is a patient sculptor. We think of storms as fierce, but the true power of air is not in sudden gusts, but in its persistence. Grains of sand lifted and set down again, whispers of abrasion against rock faces, stone arches hollowed open not in decades but in eons. If we listen carefully, the desert's silence is filled with the sound of matter being rearranged grain by grain, mountain by mountain, until what was once towering becomes smooth, what was once permanent turns to dust. Could it be that, in this too, time is writing its endings? Not sudden, not absolute, but tiny removals so constant that they become invisible. Glaciers grind with the slow strength of continents. A single sheet of ice, heavy as mountain ranges, presses forward with the patience of deep time. In its path, valleys are gouged, boulders are carried, entire terrains are remapped. And still, none of this feels like violence. It feels instead like inevitability. When the ice recedes, it leaves behind lakes carved like mirrors, moraines like scars, reminders that even something as seemingly timeless as stone can be pressed into new forms when enough years are stacked upon it. Perhaps there is no such thing as permanence, only change drawn in strokes too slow for the human eye. What fascinates and unsettles is how invisible this sculpting feels to those of us passing through. A tree can grow and die in the span of 1 century, but the cliff it rooted in continues, eroding so subtly that no lifetime records even its slightest retreat. We walk by mountains and believe they are eternal. We take shelter in caves and imagine they have always been there. But the truth is stranger. We stand not in eternity, but in fractions of transformation we cannot perceive fully. Maybe every step we take is across a surface that is slipping away, not with urgency, but with a cadence too slow to enter human memory. And this opens a question. If the world is always in motion but appears unmoving to the human eye, how much of reality do we fail to see? Is it possible that time itself erases most of its movements from us, leaving us blind to the ways the earth is dissolving and remaking itself? The river continues its carving whether we notice it or not. The wind continues its hollowing whether we record it or not. The ice drags stone whether we believe it or not. We are left only with hints. A canyon far too wide, a dune carried too far, a polished pebble that once was part of a mountain. Entropy ensures that every structure built, whether natural or human-made, bends slowly toward decay, and in decay carries forward into the next form. The cathedral crumbles into sediment. The mountain erodes into sand. The coastline withdraws under the patient assault of the tide. Nothing here is hurried, but nothing is paused either. Every moment is a rearranging of matter, every second a quiet step in endings so gradual we do not yet recognize them as endings at all. If endings are written anywhere, they are written slowly, layered in the gentle chiseling of rivers, winds, and glaciers. Perhaps every stone we touch is, in a way, already falling, already turning back into the earth's wider body. To recognize this is not to mourn, but to marvel at the patience of time, to wonder at forces so steady that they make cliffs and valleys into the mere punctuation of geological sentences. And yet, if such patient movements are what press endings into being, what might they already be preparing for us invisibly in the landscapes we call permanent today? Perhaps the answer lies not just in the stones being worn down, but in the traces those stones will one day preserve. For if the cliffs and canyons carry the grooves of time, then fossils are the Earth's way of freezing endings, taking what has lived, what has fallen, and keeping its outline as if in delicate memory. Petrified trees, shells pressed into stone, bones sealed in sedimentary rock. These are not just artifacts, but echoes of life that once moved and breathed. A fossil is not life itself, but a shadow of it, the afterimage of existence preserved in rock and dust. To hold one in your hand is to touch the patience of the planet, to feel a creature's presence tens of millions of years after silence took its place. But if the ancient past has left its ghosts in stone, what of us? Our forests, our breath, our bones? What of the things we build and then abandon? When rivers close over ruins, when deserts swallow glass towers, when oceans consume cities, something may fossilize. Not only of the natural, but of us. Plastics harder to erase than shells. Steel beams, long after their builders are gone. Concrete foundations, layered like reefs beneath the silt. Even artifacts of pure invention, microchips, alloys, circuitry, may one day rest in stone, discovered, if ever, as strange anomalies of a vanished age. Could it be that our true fossils are not bone or tooth, but the technofossils of a species that reshaped a planet before slipping back into silence? It is a humbling thought that while trilobites, ammonites, and ancient mammals left elegant imprints of ribs and shells, we may leave something cruder but no less permanent. The outlines of skyscrapers entombed where oceans reclaimed them, highways fossilized beneath shifting sands, landfills compressed into seams of plastic rock. If one day some intelligence, whether terrestrial or otherwise, studies these layers, will they understand the story they tell? Or will they see only broken fragments, scattered and strange, with no way to piece together imagination, art, memory, love? Fossils preserve structure, but not essence. They preserve bone, but not laughter. Shell, but never song. Maybe someday the story of humans will be as incomplete as the story of the dinosaurs, a puzzle of hard parts with soft meanings erased forever. Geology reminds us to expect silence. Most life that has ever existed left no fossil. It vanished without imprint, absorbed back into Earth's patient recycling. Entire civilizations, too, can be erased. We know this because even now, lost cities are found only in fragments, bits of pottery, faint walls beneath the soil. Entropy ensures that memory decays. What we imagine as lasting is often only paused in its erasure. Perhaps then our age of monuments, our skyscrapers and our machines, will pass as quietly as shells on a beach, with only a handful of survivors pressed into stone. Perhaps, on the scale of deep time, our cities will leave no more mark than the faint trails of crinoids buried in limestone. Still, there is a strangeness to imagining the future fossil. A pressed leaf is something we recognize. But what about a smartphone encased in silt? Or a section of road fractured but fused to stone by heat? Would such remains belong to the natural record? Or would they confuse it, appearing as synthetic intrusions in a world otherwise shaped by weathering and water? Maybe millions of years from now, long after humanity itself is forgotten, Earth will hold layers of such anomalies, waiting for someone or something to stumble upon them to ask, who made this and why did they vanish? In this sense, fossils of tomorrow are as much about what may endure as about what may refuse endurance. Because perhaps nothing of us is kept. Perhaps plastic crumbles sooner than we imagine. Steel dissolves quicker than myth. Concrete fractures back into dust before it has long to linger. Maybe our greatest fossil will be absence itself. An empty layer in the geological record where rich biodiversity suddenly thins, where chemical signatures whisper of carbon spikes, rising heat, and decline. That too would be fossil. Not imprint, but vacancy. A silence inside rock that says something was here, and then it ended. And so we find ourselves asking, What will Earth choose to remember of us? Will our mark be indelible, or will we vanish as thoroughly as those countless forgotten lives that left nothing at all? If endings are made permanent only by chance, then perhaps the most enduring truth is this: fossils remind us not of what lasts, but of how much is always lost. And yet, if entire species, civilizations, and even ages can vanish with so little trace, what about the oceans themselves, the vast, living archives beneath the waves? Could the memory of Earth be deepest not in stone, but in water waiting to be read? For while cliffs and mountains offer fragments, the seabed carries sentences, whole chapters sealed in mud and silt, pressed tightly in the silence of the deep. Oceans are not only where life began, but where so much memory remains, hidden in sediments that have never seen light. To look at the water's surface is to see only its present mood, calm or restless, reflecting sky. But to sink into its depths is to enter a library where the shelves go on forever. Each layer of seabed tells of storms no human ever felt, of eruptions whose ash drifted across the entire globe before quietly falling into the sea, of sudden blooms of plankton rising and vanishing in great cycles of abundance and loss. Under pressure and time, these records flatten into ribbons of stone, pages that can be peeled open millions of years later. And within them we find dust from continents, pollen from vanished forests, isotopic signatures of climates so alien we can scarcely imagine what it felt like to be alive then. Could it be that the ocean floor is less liquid graveyard and more planetary memory chamber? An endless recorder that has never shut off? The ocean remembers extinctions more completely than the land. The end of the dinosaurs is marked not just in craters or bones, but as a fine line of clay in marine sediments, enriched with iridium from the meteor that fell. A single, thin layer, measured in centimeters, holds the silence of an entire vanished age. If we look closer still, we find shells of plankton altered in chemical balance, fossils telling us the atmosphere shifted, temperatures soared, currents faltered. Earth kept what happened, the ocean stored it, and still it waits for us, silent but legible, if we learn the patience of its scale. But the ocean does not only remember catastrophe, it remembers rhythms. The slow inhaling and exhaling of ice ages leaves its mark in the ratio of oxygen isotopes within tiny shells. Each shell carries the temperature of seawater when it lived. Thousands together tell of climates swinging back and forth over hundreds of thousands of years in patterns steady as breath. Imagine dust blown from far deserts, carried across wide skies, settling eventually into the ocean's hand. Each speck a witness to wind. Layer upon layer they accumulate, a million fingerprints of eras no one could have witnessed, eras that come back into focus only when we drill into the seabed and listen carefully to what it has been saving all this time. And what does it mean to think of the ocean as an archive? Not halfway, not partial, but continuous, almost unfailing. It has gathered more honesty than any history book we have written. If memory is often thought of as fragile in us, slipping, distorting, vanishing, then the ocean's memory is different. It is rigorous, unyielding, without intention, but absolute. It does not edit. It does not choose. It catches what falls and keeps it, whether bloom or ash, bone or dust, silence or abundance. And yet, even here, its patience is not infinite. Through subduction, the seabed itself is pulled down, carried into the crust, melted, rewritten. Even oceans recycle. Even a record that feels complete must someday reset itself. This, too, is part of the memory, remembering until forgetting is inevitable. Perhaps that is the true wonder, that the ocean holds traces not to cling to them, but to pass them forward briefly, until even those traces drift beneath fire and are reborn. We stand at the shoreline looking out, believing the sea alive only with waves and tides, but beneath our feet a longer story rests. Could it be that every breaking wave is only the surface of an unseen archive, vast beyond imagination, where the past still breathes in silence? Maybe what we call the present is only thin skin, stretched across a depth of memory so deep that no diving vessel, no drill, could ever reach its bottom. And if the ocean remembers so much of what has been, does it also carry a whisper of what will come? In its chemistry, we find not only past climates, but foreshadowing of changes yet to arrive. Reduced oxygen zones hint at futures of stilled water. Acidification carved into coral is a preview of reefs to come. The memory does not speak of prophecy, or does it? For when patterns are repeated in such long cycles, can they not be read as rhythms we are destined to meet again? The currents carry past into present, so why not present into what waits ahead? Not because the ocean is alive in the way we are, but because time itself is an unbroken ripple traveling across its surface. And so the ocean is both reminder and question. Reminder that nothing is ever lost completely, that even when civilizations fade, when forests disappear, when species vanish, there is an imprint left beneath the sea. Question, because we do not yet know which of our traces will sink into its care, or how long they will remain before subduction rewrites them as absence. Perhaps our era of oil and plastic, of carbon rising, of chemical fingerprints unlike any before, will one day be a thin line in marine stone, a layer strange enough to be recognized even when all else of us is gone, which leaves us with a thought, quiet but unshakable. If even the oceans, with their infinite patience, cannot keep memory forever, then what does eternity mean for the planet at all? And yet, before we answer, let us look at how endings themselves prepare beginnings, how death in one place seeds life in another. And yet, before we answer what the ocean's memory truly holds, we must consider something softer, something stranger. When endings appear final, they are rarely alone. Death never arrives without carrying with it the seed of something that follows. When life ends, life begins, though not always where we expect it. On the surface, we are taught to see death as silence. A tree falls, a body cools, a cycle breaks. But in the quiet turnover of ecosystems, each absence becomes a beginning. Spaces opening, nutrients released, soil recharged, a pulse continuing long after the form itself has faded. Take the whale fall. When a whale dies and its massive body drifts to the seafloor, it seems like the story of its journey has closed. And yet the reality is more wondrous. Within hours, scavengers arrive. Within weeks, worms and crustaceans bore into the bones. Within decades, even the marrow sustains life forms so specialized they exist nowhere else. What once swam the open oceans becomes, in its ending, an island of new flourishing in the abyss. A single body transformed into an entire world for centuries. It is not tragedy alone. It is inheritance. On land, too, endings do not mean stillness. A forest clearing made by fire may look like devastation, blackened trunks and ash rising in silence. Yet in the fertile soil, nutrients released by combustion nourish the roots of seedlings waiting in shadow. Mushrooms thrive on the decay. Flowers bloom where light had not reached before. Entire landscapes transform because one community ended, allowing another to emerge. The scar left by heat is rewritten as meadow. Absence turns to abundance, not by design, but by the slow persistence of life reclaiming every empty space. Volcanic fields echo this rhythm. Fresh lava seems like death itself, a smothering, a flattening, an erasure. But soon as it cools, life begins again. Mosses root into cracks, lichens dissolve stone to soil, winds bring spores and seeds across black glass. Entire forests sprout from the furnace floor. Given centuries, what was once destruction becomes lush and green, as though the earth had simply taken a pause before exhaling again. We call it succession, a process both inevitable and humbling, where time overlays ruin with renewal. Is it possible, then, that life's endings are never endings at all, but only quiet exchanges, a handing over from one form to another? Could it be that death is not silence, but rearrangement? Carbon becomes food, bone becomes soil, soil becomes leaf, leaf becomes ash. The language is not erasure, but transformation. Life recycles itself with an elegance so complete we forget to notice. Perhaps this is why entropy, despite its pull, is never final here on Earth. What falls apart is taken up again, repurposed, reborn. Not because there is mercy, but because matter cannot stop moving forward. And yet, if this is true for forests, if this is true for whales, if this is true for soil and ash, then the question emerges, what happens when the planet itself begins to die? Could a world hand itself back into some larger cycle? The sun's expansion will burn oceans away, will sterilize continents, will erase photosynthesis and the pulses of oxygen in the air. What seedling could take root in that immensity of loss? What community could follow? We do not know. Perhaps none. Perhaps endings scale in such a way that some cycles end quietly, to make room, while larger ones end without renewal. Or perhaps even then, in some unimaginable register, energy reshapes itself into beginnings we cannot yet perceive. Maybe even the evaporation of oceans becomes fuel for other chemistry in the cosmos, beginnings that Earth itself will never see. The comfort, or the mystery, is that we cannot say with certainty where the line between ending and beginning truly lies. Even memory itself seems subject to this law. A vanished civilization becomes a forgotten ruin, the ruin becomes dust, the dust becomes sedimentary stone, and suddenly it is not a civilization at all, but part of the planet's fabric, embedded in a new way. Did it end? Or did it simply blend? Maybe what we call the end is only an illusion, because the story feels too long for us to follow. And so, with every fossil and every scar, the planet assures us that time never stops with endings, but folds those endings into the next thing. The whale into the abyssal city, the tree into the meadow, the lava plain into forest, and perhaps one day even the Earth into the cosmos itself. But this thought remains unsettled, half open, like a page turned before it is finished, because if life always makes of loss some kind of continuation, then the question becomes, what if memory itself also obeys this law? When forgetting arrives, does something else quietly begin? And so, if every end carries its own beginning, if life arranges itself to flourish even in decay, then we must wonder what is written into the stone itself. For it is here, in the geology beneath our feet, that Earth keeps its longest rhythms, the cycles of loss and renewal that far exceed the lifetimes of forests, oceans, even species. Rocks remember in silence what everything else forgets. They tell of eras when the planet froze in sheets of ice, of ages when the seas covered the continents, of extinctions that erased entire lineages before giving way to rebirth. To study stone is to listen to endings layered upon endings, and to realize that none of them, not one, was truly final. Ice ages come as winters stretch to continental scale. The chemical signature of frozen oceans is hidden in rocks, in isotopes that mark colder waters, in soils dropped by glaciers as they crawled across the land. And then, just as slowly, they retreat, leaving valleys carved broad and rivers redirected. For tens of thousands of years, the Earth exhales warmth again, forests spread, and life multiplies. But the cycle does not end there. Another freeze waits ahead, patient, inevitable. Comes, it goes, again and again, like the Earth drawing breath over millennia. Our world ends often, but only to begin again. Floods, too, mark the stone. The oceans once poured far inland, drowning grasslands, swallowing deserts. Whole coastlines shifted, creatures adapted or vanished, and their remains fused into the new seabeds. Later, waters withdrew, revealing plains that had once lain silent beneath waves. Today we call them dry land, as though permanent, though stone tells us otherwise. Dust that once drifted across warm deserts now sits in ancient seabed rock, a reminder that boundaries between water and land are not fixed, but oscillations within larger cycles. Ocean becomes continent, continent becomes ocean, over spans of time we can scarcely comprehend. Extinctions are written as absences in the rock record, gaps, silences where diversity suddenly falls away. There is the great dying of the Permian, when nearly all marine life ended, remembered by layers of black shale suffused with carbon from dying seas. There is the asteroid at the close of the Cretaceous, etched as a thin line of iridium, marking the end for dinosaurs and the beginning for mammals. Each extinction wears its severity in stone, a geological scar. And yet, after each collapse comes renewal. New species arising, new landscapes reshaped, new voices replacing those lost. Even the harshest goodbye in Earth's archive folds eventually into resurgence. Stone does not hurry to tell its stories. Volcanic layers stack upon themselves like pages, ash hardened into rock. River sediments compress into shale. Shifting plates raise seabeds to mountaintops, where fossils of long-vanished shells stare out into the open sky. A mountain itself is not a monument to permanence. It is a monument to everything temporary, a monument to the slow lifting and wearing that guarantees it will someday be sand again. Look closely at a cliff face, and you are not seeing stability, you are seeing a timeline. Bands of color, erosion channels, fossils locked in place. Every ridge is a sentence, every fold a memory. Entropy drifts through this story quietly. The law that all structures tend toward disorder becomes, over geologic time, not decay alone but transformation. Rocks fracture, heat melts them, pressure remakes them. Granite becomes sediment, sediment becomes shale, shale is pushed beneath tectonic plates, melted into fire, and lifted again as something new. What seems like ruin is actually metamorphosis, a recycling that prevents anything from truly vanishing. So much of stone is rewritten again and again, like breath returning, like a page erased only to carry another line. Could it be that the earth itself experiences death only in fragments? A farewell here, a collapse there, but never the whole? Perhaps the planet ends often, but only in parts, never as a complete silence. What we see is loss, ice swallowing valleys, oceans erasing land, extinction reshaping life. Maybe, in another scale of time, only transitions, pauses within a longer rhythm. Maybe the long goodbye we imagine for the planet is not one prolonged ending, but a countless series of inhalations and exhalations, each one dispersing life before breathing it back again in altered form. And where does that leave us, standing as short-lived listeners among these cycles? Our lives pass quickly, our memory fragile, our stories short. We call disasters endings because they arrive faster than we can comprehend. But the stone whispers otherwise. Nothing here truly stays, but nothing here is erased entirely either. The rock archive is a palimpsest, half memory, half forgetting, half beginning. Always incomplete, always continuing. Perhaps the closest we come to permanence is realizing that impermanence itself is the law. A farewell in stone is only ever partial. One age closes, another begins. The crust may heave or the glaciers return, or the seas swallow coasts. To read geology is to realize that endings and beginnings are always coupled, inseparable, and that the earth so often exhales only to breathe again. A last horizon for us may be something else entirely for the planet, a rhythm it has practiced countless times before. And yet, if the earth has ended often only to continue, then what happens when the star it circles begins to fail? What if the rhythm of breath belongs not only to earth, but also to the sun, glowing above us, growing older in silence with every passing moment? For now it feels eternal, warm, golden, steady. The giver of seasons, the keeper of light and shadow, the quiet boundary between daydream and nightfall. But the sun, too, like all things, has a lifespan. It is a fire that burns patiently, not endlessly. And one day, long after we are gone, it will reveal the slow truth of its age. The sun is not a flame in the way a candle is flame. It does not consume oxygen. It does not flicker with the rush of air. Instead, its fire is nuclear, fusion converting hydrogen into helium at unimaginable pressures and scales. It has burned this way for about 4.5 billion years, and it has enough to continue for billions more. But deep down, the balance is changing. The fuel of youth is being spent. The core gathers more helium with time, packing tighter under gravity, growing hotter, altering the steady song of fusion. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the sun brightens. Not because it wishes to, but because that is what stars inevitably do as they age. Even now, scientists tell us, the sun is brighter than it was when the Earth was young. Ancient rocks remind us of this. The isotopes within them, echoing faint climates of past atmospheres, show us a paradox. The young sun was dimmer, and yet Earth still flowed with liquid water, warmed by higher greenhouse gases in its air. Over time, as the sun has grown more luminous, Earth has adjusted, balanced by shifts in atmosphere, by cycles of carbon, by storms and oceans acting as moderators. But balance is fragile. Perhaps one day, within only a billion years, even without waiting for the grand swelling of the red giant. The sun's gradual brightening will boil away oceans, turn forests into dust, erase rivers before they can carve stone. What if the end begins earlier than we dare imagine? Not sudden, but slowly, almost invisibly already underway. Far further ahead, though, waits a more certain transformation. The day will come when hydrogen in the sun's core is too depleted for the same steady burning. The balance between gravity pulling inward and fusion pushing outward will falter. And in this faltering, the sun will change. Not collapse to cold immediately, but expand. Its outer layers swelling and cooling, shifting the star's glow from golden to red. The red giant, a sun swollen to such magnitude that Mercury, then Venus, and perhaps even Earth itself will be swallowed whole. Not myth, not speculation for imagination's sake, but an event scene played out already in countless other stars, scattered like reminders across the night sky. What would Earth look like then in those final days? Perhaps the oceans would already be gone, vanished into steam that drifted into space. Perhaps the atmosphere would have thinned like brittle parchment, lost to solar winds unshielded as Earth's magnetism unraveled. The continents, exposed and scorched, would crack and warp under relentless heat. What once carried forests and rivers might glow instead with molten rock, stone unraveling back into its fiery origins. And if by chance the planet survives the sun's expansion without consumption, it would orbit now in a realm of silence, charred into a husk, no memory left but stone, no witness left to recall its song. But even here, wonder persists, because this ending, catastrophic to us, is part of a larger cycle in the cosmos. Entropy dictates it, but also renewal. As the sun grows older, it does not vanish into nothing. Even as a red giant, it will eventually release its outer layers gently into space, drifting clouds of gas-forming shells of glowing color. A planetary nebula, a death shroud made beautiful, revealing for a brief cosmic moment the sun's last breath in radiant patterns. What remains afterward is a white dwarf, small, dense, and cooling, a star's ember holding the weight of memory in compressed silence. Could it be that Earth's final contribution to the universe is to become part of that expansion? To scatter minerals and dust into space, fused into the very gas that will spread into the galaxy? If so, then Earth is not simply erased. It dissolves into a wider canvas, its atoms cast forward, perhaps one day part of a new star, a new world, maybe new life. Endings scaled larger than oceans, larger than mass extinctions, follow the same pattern we see in forests and whales. Nothing remains untouched, but everything is carried forward into transformation. And we, sitting here thinking in small lifetimes, can only imagine. The sun's schedule is too vast for human imagination to hold comfortably. We see centuries, we measure dates. The sun counts in billions of years and stellar fates. It is possible that by then, humanity will be long dissolved into mystery, our trace as strange to other eyes as trilobite fossils are to us. Or maybe no eyes remain to witness it at all. The sun growing red in silence, Earth's ashes drifting without remark. Perhaps memory, too, burns away, leaving nothing to remember what the sun once nurtured. Or perhaps memory is carried not in minds, but in matter itself, as the carbon we breathe becomes the dust of another galaxy. And as this thought lingers, cool and unsettling, we must return softly to the present. Our sun glows golden still. The warmth of morning light still touches oceans, forests, cities. This quiet aging does not yet threaten us, not directly. But like all things, we exist within that same schedule. Every heartbeat ticked against a stellar clock. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but written all the same on the face of time. And yet, if one day the sky itself will fade to fire, if the sun's inevitable swelling will erase oceans and forests, then what sound will remain after the water is gone? What silence waits when waves no longer rise, when the seas themselves retreat forever? Before the final heat arrives, some scientists imagine the oceans slipping away more quietly, not vanishing all at once, but withdrawing step by step, until shorelines are abandoned, bays dry into valleys, coral reefs crumble into dust under a sun that shines just slightly too warm. The seas, once vast enough to shape the rhythms of the continents, might become shallow remnants, evaporating into the wind, leaving behind hard salt flats where once whales sang and waves roared endlessly against cliffs. What would the world be without oceans? Without their motion, their tides, their breath of storms? They have shaped every climate, every migration, every rhythm of life we know. Without them, the air would lose its softness. The planet would lose its temperance and balance. A world without seas is a world of extremes. Day burning, night freezing, continents unmoored from the pulse that has always flowed around them. Could it be that in losing the ocean, what we lose most deeply is not water, but the heartbeat of the earth itself? Geology gives us small visions of this silence. Inland seas have dried before. The Mediterranean, millions of years ago, nearly emptied during the Messinian salinity crisis, leaving thick salt deposits in its place. Desert basins hold evaporite minerals, silent witnesses of vanished waters that once filled entire regions. Fossils of marine life are found where no sea has been for eons. The pattern is familiar. Water retreats, life alters, silence expands. These dry memories are not only past possibilities, they are echoes of a future scenario, waiting in some horizon not yet reached. Imagine walking an exposed seabed, long after waves have gone. The ground beneath your feet is cracked and pale, a canvas of salt crystals shining like broken glass. You find fossil shells in the open air, not because they were lifted by tectonics, but because the ocean left them behind in its forgetting. The air carries no scent of salt mist, only the dust of an emptied basin. The soundscape is nearly absent. No rhythm of tides, no gulls calling to waves, only wind, fragile and without anchor, moving across silence too vast to fill. And yet even this absence carries a strange memory. The sediments the oceans leave behind are records of what they once held. Drifting pollen from vanished forests, ash from ancient eruptions, isotopes telling of vanished climates. The seabed stores not only the presence of water but its loss. Salt flats themselves are fossils of an ocean's breathing, preserved in crystals and mineral deposits like scars of what once was fluid. Perhaps in this way, the silence after oceans is not empty, but archival. A stillness that has written words into the crust, even when no water remains to speak them aloud. But what if silence does not only come from emptiness? What if silence transforms into something alive in its own way? Desert creatures might move into these flats, creating small ecologies where once fish swam. Winds may carve sand into ridges that mimic waves. Minerals might sparkle under sunlight, reflecting as water once did, making mirages where memory insists sea must remain. Could it be that silence itself becomes a new kind of ocean? Not an ocean of waves, but an ocean of echoes, of illusions written upon emptiness? Maybe not. In such imaginings, endings once again blur. The ocean seems gone, yet in salt, in residue, in wind-carved silence, it lingers. Silence itself becomes a kind of continuity, an afterlife of sound stored as stillness. A reminder that even the greatest rhythms, once stopped, leave behind shadows of their form. But this leaves us unsettled, because after the last wave has fallen, a question drifts forward. If the sea, the planet's deepest memory, can vanish so completely, then what sound remains to bear witness to dust and ash, to carry forward the story of Earth? And if the seas themselves can vanish, leaving only silence carved into salt, then what sound will remain to bear the story of Earth? Perhaps the answer lies not in water or wave, but in what drifts after. Dust, ash, and memory. These are the patient inheritors of endings, carried by winds, settling on stone, seeping into every crevice. Long after fire fades, long after storms scatter, it is the fine particles, the quiet debris of what once lived, that endure as record, pressed into layers that outlast even memory itself. Dust is not merely emptiness. It is made of fragments, the ground down remains of bone, of shell, of soil, of cities, of us. It gathers on forgotten ruins, veils mountain ridges, swirls across deserts where oceans once lay. Inhaling it, we breathe in deep time, particles that may have begun as volcanic glass, as remnants of forests burned in climates past, as minerals eroded from ranges long since collapsed. Dust moves easily, yet its journey is eternal. Science tells us that iron-rich dust from the Sahara feeds the Amazon, that nutrients lifted from one dying landscape nourish another, continents away. What seems like loss becomes continuity. What drifts as absence becomes seed elsewhere. Perhaps in this, dust is the planet's unspoken voice, a reminder that nothing ends without dispersing into something beyond itself. Ash tells an even darker memory. When forests burn, when volcanoes erupt, when skies blacken, it is ash that falls as witness. We find it in soil horizons, delicate gray bands marking vanished centuries. We find it in ice cores, thin traces of eruptions and wildfires that shaped ancient atmospheres. A single layer of ash, sometimes no thicker than a hand, can mark the silence of species, the climate swinging sharply, the world faltering for decades. Toba, Krakatoa, Iceland's great eruptions, all written not in monuments but in ash scattered thin as powder. Even when the living forget, the land remembers. Could it be that the earth itself breathes caution through such traces, showing us how fragile the balance has always been? And dust and ash never act alone. They mingle with time. In deep strata, volcanic ash turns to tough, solid stone forever stamped with eruption. Glacier dust pressed into ice becomes a climate archive, each trapped particle holding records of atmosphere, of CO2 levels, of vanished winds. This is how scientists read isotopes like palimpsests, measuring oxygen atoms within snow that long ago fell silent. In these frozen specks, we hear echoes. The shiver of an ice age, the warmth of an interglacial, the trace of a burning forest no one alive ever saw. Dust does not speak loudly, but it remembers better than the living ever can. And yet, memory is never complete. Much is lost. For every ash bed we read, countless fires have burned unmarked. For every dust layer preserved, storms have passed into nothing. Entropy ensures the forgetting. Lava covers ash. Erosion removes records. Subduction pulls sediments into the hungry mantle. But is forgetting truly loss? Or is it another form of recycling, folding pieces of memory into the Earth's deeper silence, waiting one day to resurface in another shape? Maybe the crust itself is only half journal, half eraser, writing, then rewriting. Not because it chooses, but because time demands it. Perhaps what is most haunting is that dust always blurs the boundary between past and present. As we walk along a street, dust gathers quietly on our skin, on our walls, on our breath. It carries pollen, soot, fragments of concrete, traces of oceans and winds. Archaic, modern, and future all mixed together into the same soft gray veil. It asks us, what trace are you leaving? What fossils of tomorrow float invisible through the air already, carried into places you will never walk? Could it be that dust is the planet's handwriting? Each grain a letter, drifting, carried, forgotten, yet arranged across surfaces as testimony of endings always in motion? Maybe that is why we associate dust with memory. Dust on a bookshelf reminds us of time past. Dust on an ancient ruin marks centuries gone. Dust in the stratosphere shifts climates, dims the sun fractionally, nudging the Earth's temperature in secret. So much of what we are and were becomes dust, and so much of what dust carries we will never notice. Ash too is haunting in its duality. It is death and renewal together. Fertile soils of entire nations, soils of Italy, of Hawaii, of Iceland, are enriched by ash that once fell catastrophically. Crops grow deeper there, civilizations rise upon them, even while remembering that the same ash could fall again. Catastrophe and cultivation, inseparable in the quiet mineral powder drifting down from the sky. This paradox is everywhere. Endings marking beginnings, beginnings seeded by endings. And so dust and ash, far from being trivial, become the great archivists of time. Carriers of memory, destroyers of clarity, keepers of cycles too slow for us to measure. They veil the planet, they settle on oceans, they darken snow, they instruct the future while burying the past. The The silence after oceans may stretch wide, but dust and ash will still be moving, still whispering faint records of forests, of fires, of suns dimmed in shadow. And yet, if dust and ash remember so much, more than we, more than even the oceans, then what can we learn from the silence between their layers? In those spans where the record goes quiet, whole ages may have ended with nothing left to say. The Earth has rehearsed endings before. Not once, not twice, but many times entire worlds of species erased, never to return. We call them the Great Extinctions, each marked like tombstones in the stratigraphy of time. The Ordovician, the Devonian, the Permian, the Triassic, the Cretaceous, each one stamped into the crust as a sudden thinning, a silence in abundance. And now, as we measure our own patterns, it is whispered that perhaps we are standing inside the doorway of the sixth. The Ordovician, roughly 445 million years ago, when most life thrived in seas, a sudden freeze swept across the planet. Glaciers carved across Gondwana. Oceans withdrew in great regression. Climates shifted wildly. Nearly 85% of marine species vanished, small organisms locked in limestone as their final chapters. The layer remembers it not in words, but in isotopes. Oxygen ratios telling of colder seas, carbon cycles interrupted, shells fossilized in disordered abundance before the silence arrived. It was the Earth's first great farewell, though it did not know it yet. The Devonian, just 60 million years later. This was a time of fish, armored placoderms hunting in rivers, lush green plants spreading onto land. But ecosystems teetered. Oceans faltered under anoxic collapse, oxygen levels plunging until reefs suffocated and seas bore only dark, still waters. Coral disappeared. Trilobites thinned. Again, the rocks remember. Black shales, rich in organic matter, betraying breathless oceans that endured for thousands of years. Silence persisted long enough that recovery felt slow, almost doubtful. And yet, again, life returned. Rewritten, altered, diminished, but alive. The Permian, twice over again in deep time, the greatest farewell of all. 252 million years ago, volcanic fire erupted across what is now Siberia, unfurling basalt floods thousands of meters deep. The atmosphere shifted in ways almost unimaginable. A surge of greenhouse gases, seas acidified, oxygen levels collapsed. Over 90% of species erased. Forests died, insects vanished, the oceans filled with toxic blooms and silence. The fossil record shouts here, not in abundance, but in absence. The sheer emptiness of the Permian boundary tells of a world nearly reset to zero. The Earth's most complete rehearsal of ending. The Triassic. 50 million years later, life was rebuilt, but fragile. The supercontinent Pangaea held the land as one, vast deserts and storms spanning coasts. Again, volcanic fire splitting continents, releasing enough carbon to tilt the world into another collapse. Large amphibians gone, reptilian lineages erased. But from that, the dinosaurs rose, reshaping ecosystems once more. Out of endings, beginnings. This rhythm, cruel as it seems, appears to be how Earth breathes. The Cretaceous, the most famous of all. 66 million years ago, a rock from space found Earth. Its fireball-shadowed skies, raining molten glass, filling the atmosphere with dust that sealed the world in twilight. Dinosaurs ended, pterosaurs gone. Ammonites ended in the seas. Almost 3/4 of life erased in a single cascade. But here again, stone remembers it with precision. A thin layer enriched with iridium, a metal rare on Earth but common in asteroids. A line spread across the entire planet. Clay as thin as a hand yet as final as a tombstone. In its shadow, mammals rose, small survivors growing larger, carrying forward what the dinosaurs left undone. 5 endings, already rehearsed. And yet, here we are. Humanity existing not despite them, but because of them. Each extinction carved a clearing, and within that clearing life regrew, new branches rising where others had fallen. We walk in a world assembled from their ruins. But what of now? Scientists whisper of a sixth, unfolding not in myth but in front of us. Not because the Earth has changed orbit, not because fire from the sky has arrived, but because a single species altered climates, burned fuels, cut forests, drove extinctions faster than ecosystems could recover. Not because the planet chooses, but because we touched every system, and the balance became thin. Today, amphibians are vanishing with rates unmatched since the great collapses of the past. Coral reefs bleach and dissolve under heat and acidification. Insects decline in fragile silence, ecosystems unraveling with them. The fossil record forms not in centuries, but now in soils enriched with plastic, in sediments carrying isotopic traces of fossil fuels, in technofossils humans have made. Could it be that one day some distant observer might point to this thin layer, our layer, and note the sudden loss of species, the trace of plastics, the spike of carbon, the strange fingerprint of one civilization? Already, geologists speak of the Anthropocene. Perhaps it is not an age, but a boundary, another marker of silence and loss. And yet, the strangeness persists. Extinctions are absolute for those erased, but not for the Earth itself. Earth has always folded endings into continuations. Perhaps the sixth would do the same, though its rhythm would be cruel and long, ecosystems needing millions of years to rest-stitch themselves. Perhaps the gap after us would feel as long as after the Permian, silence stretching long before renewal trembled back into being. Would anything recognize our trace? Would memory hold our name, our fire, our noise? Or would we vanish as anonymous as the trilobites, our story rewritten as fragments untranslatable? The thought drifts quietly, unsettling and soft. Maybe nothing remains. Maybe too much does. Maybe both are true. The record stretches evenly across stone, whispering that extinction is both end and seed, both absolute and impermanent. The Earth, after all, ends often but always continues. And yet, if even extinction is part of the rhythm, folding life from silence again and again, then what shape will our own age fossilize into? Perhaps not only in shells or teeth or bones, but in something stranger, the technofossil layer. For unlike ammonites pressed into limestone or trilobites sealed inside shale, the traces of us will not only be living things transformed by rock, but the things we made. Our artifacts, artificial and enduring, already seeping into stone, already leaving signatures that time itself will inherit. Concrete, the ground we walk upon, is poured like water but hardens like mountain. Already it rivals geology in its spread, covering earth in pavements, bridges, towers. In deep time, concrete may outlast the very ruins it once constructed, breaking, tumbling, and settling into sediments. Future geologists, if any remain to touch those layers, would find its coarse chemistry unmistakable. Lime and crushed stone, an artificial mixture never before natural to the stratigraphy of the planet. Our roads, our foundations, our cities, turn to rock inside rock. Steel too. Layers of rusting iron embedded into soil, skyscrapers and shipwrecks dissolving yet fusing into mineral seams. Steel is not eternal, yet recycled enough by nature, it might alloy with sediments, leaving hints of ordered patterns, deliberate shapes. And plastic, perhaps the strangest of all. Human invention hardened from oil, transformed into threads, fabrics, shells, vessels. Scientists have already found plastiglomerates, natural rock fused with synthetic polymer, fragments of humanity melded with beach sand, volcanic stone, coral. In such hybrids, nature and manufacture are inseparable, a new geology born silently. Could it be that plastic, though designed for impermanence and use, becomes Earth's most enduring signature, millions of years beyond us? Even microchips, small and fragile, may leave whispers behind. Silicon etched finely, metallic traces fused intricately. While entropy will dismantle circuits, elements within them, rare earths, gold, tungsten, are not erased, but spread quietly into sediments. If some intelligence dug down into a far future stratum, they would find chemical anomalies clustered oddly together, neither volcanic nor cosmic in origin, but intentional. Artificial pockets of strangeness layered into dust and stone. The fingerprint of our species written not by bone but by design. Entombed landscapes emerge in thought. Cities swallowed by deserts, streets buried beneath dunes, ports drowned under oceans, their glass and steel broken but preserved in silt. In deep time, such things would compress into thin geological bands, indistinguishable perhaps by sight, save for chemistry, save for fragments too orderly to be chance. Archaeologists today uncover shards of pottery and call them the remnants of civilization. But imagine a far epoch where shards of plastic, fragments of microchips, broken glass bottles sedimented into cliffs are what passed for pottery. Our story told by our discards, our debris. What is strange is that these technofossils may endure not because of beauty or intention, but because of sheer persistence. Shells fossilize because they are hard, mineralized. Our creations fossilize because they refuse to decay fully. We often imagine ourselves vanishing without trace, as forgotten as the countless species that never left fossils. But perhaps the opposite is true. Perhaps we will be too present. Our ruins may linger far longer than our memory, our machines outlasting the hands that made them. Maybe not as proof of greatness, but as evidence of disruption. A layer visibly altered, a boundary of plastic and carbon spikes, unmistakably different from every past age. Geologists today call this the Anthropocene, perhaps the age of humans. But more and more, it feels like a layer that belongs less to us and more to the Earth itself. The Anthropocene will fossilize like any other boundary, the Ordovician marked by glaciation, the Cretaceous by iridium dust, and ours, perhaps, by technofossils. If evolution writes beginnings, then perhaps our technology writes endings, encoded in plastic and concrete, entombed for deep time to remember. And if so, then a question rises with a delicate unease. If someone or something did one day find this technofossil layer, what would they imagine of us? A civilization defined by strange alloys and soot? Creatures who reshaped the crust with polymers and roads? Would they ever guess laughter, song, language, tenderness? Or would they only see plastics, concrete, and rust, and wonder what vanished so quickly, what unfolded so clumsily before collapsing into silence? Could it be that we are remembered not for stories, but for plastics drifting into permanence? And yet, if these technofossils are destined to linger beyond us, then even silence cannot erase our presence. But does that mean presence is memory, or only residue without meaning? Perhaps the answer lies not just in the fragments of plastic or steel, but in the larger shapes we have carved, the cities we built as monuments to ourselves. For a city is more than material, it is intention condensed into geometry, into order. Streets aligned, towers lifted, grids repeated across landscape. And yet, in the quiet patience of entropy, order does not hold. Skylines begin to soften, skyscrapers to crumble, bridges to bend. Roads fracture like dry riverbeds. Entropy always wins, not because it hurries, but because it never needs to stop. Imagine a city left empty. First, dust settles into windows. Vines creep along stone. Birds nest where light once streamed through glass. Concrete loosens, rebar rusts, salt corrodes walls grain by grain. Then rains seep in, foundations weakening. Storms tear roofs, rivers overflow, the grip of order releasing itself slowly. In decades, streets crack with weeds. In centuries, whole districts collapse into rubble. In millennia, the skyline becomes cliff face, indistinguishable from mountain, eroded and reshaped until human detail is invisible. And yet, some trace remains, some imprint folded into future stone. Perhaps our tallest towers, compressed and buried, will become strange rock seams. Perhaps our roads, baked and fractured, will remain as lines too ordered to be chance. Entropy guarantees dissolution, but never complete erasure. Science shows us this unfolding. Iron oxidizes, concrete fractures through chemical expansion. Plastics break into fragments, scattering. Glass, durable yet vulnerable, crumbles into grains again, indistinguishable from beach sand. The very physics of entropy dictates that all collections of order tend toward disarray. Cities are no different than cliffs, no different than canyons, though they feel alien to compare. We imagine skylines as immune to the rhythms of erosion. But they are not. Buildings topple like hoodoos, foundations sink like strata, Roads wither like dried rivers. Structural decay as inevitable as the collapse of mountains into sand. Every street will someday resemble sediment, every tower indistinguishable from the rock cycle it briefly interrupted. But memory complicates this picture. To us, a city is not only material. It is meaning. Names, stories, lives compressed inside walls and staircases. And yet, meaning erodes faster than stone. In 1,000 years, the names of most streets will be forgotten. In 10,000, whole languages unknown. By the time the skyline itself has slumped into indistinction, the memory of it will already have dissolved long before. So then, what outlasts? The material without the memory? The residue without the story? Is it possible to be remembered only as stone and never as voice? Perhaps that is the deepest silence of entropy, not only dissolving structures, but dissolving the meanings they carried. And this absence raises a melancholic wonder. If one day ruins are mistaken as natural, their order obscured by erosion, does the past still exist in those shapes? Or is it erased once recognition is gone? Could it be that all civilizations, no matter how vast, are doomed to become anonymous geology, shifting from architecture into rock, from culture into mineral? Our great towers may never be seen as ours. They may simply pass, absorbed into a cliff's fold, an indistinguishable part of the Earth's anatomy. Presence without memory, residue without meaning. Entropy does not hurry. It does not rage. It moves with the patience of wind, the slow drip of water into cracks, the ceaseless tremor of time under gravity. Cities fall softly, quietly, the way everything eventually does. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but already beginning in motions too small to notice. And when they are gone, we are left to ask, will memory outlast the stone? Or does stone itself become the only memory left? And yet, if cities bend toward silence, their noise hushed into ruin, what then of monuments swallowed not just by entropy but by water and ice, by the shifting rhythms of climate that erase with indifference, not intent? Meltwaters and glaciers are patient destroyers of memory, not sweeping away in sudden violence, but dissolving stone inscriptions quietly, letting time's liquid hand smooth even what we once believed eternal. For thousands of years, humans carved their names, their gods, their victories into stone, convinced that rock might preserve what flesh could not. We built temples and walls, monuments meant to resist forgetting. And yet stone breathes under the pressure of time. Ice retreats not in haste but in whispers, slowly uncovering valleys, slowly cracking mountainsides, slowly swallowing the very marks we thought secure. As glaciers melt, they grind down oldest carvings, erasing script into gravel. They carry fragments into rivers, particles swept into oceans, dissolving legacy into dust too scattered to reassemble. The climate erases differently than fire or collapse. Fire leaves ash, destruction immediate and heavy. Floods sweep violently, but climate change works with indifference, a slowness that feels endless to us but casual to the deep time of Earth. It wears monuments grain by grain, seeping in through frost, through thaw, through minerals cracking with water's tiny expansions. Not because it is ruthless, but because it cannot do otherwise. Freeze, thaw, freeze, thaw. The rhythm of ice repeated enough times will turn any inscription to silence. Even now, ancient sites reveal this truth. Petroglyphs half-buried as glaciers shifted their weight. Temples submerged slowly by rising seas. Cities eroded at their edges not by invasion but by tides repeating endlessly against stone foundations. Archaeologists today mourn what is lost, but the Earth does not mourn. It simply folds memory into its process. What was temple becomes rubble, what was inscription becomes gravel, what was gravel becomes sand folded into beaches of the future. Science makes this clear in even finer detail. Meltwater carries isotopes, tiny chemical tracers, into its runoff, writing signatures of changing climate. When we pull records from ice cores, we are reading not only the memory of snow, but the slow dissolving of monuments carried away piece by piece, year by year. The very water erases while leaving archived proof of its erasing. A paradox written into glaciers themselves. They preserve climates past while dismantling the structures that lived within them. And memory dissolves because it must. Nothing carved, no matter how monumental, can compete against millions of seasons. To the eye it feels cruel, indifferent, yet it is only natural. Not because memory is unwanted, but because material cannot resist the scale of time itself. The mountain does not endure every storm. The glacier never pauses its retreat. We may etch, but the ice will edit. We may raise still monuments, but climate always rewrites them. What is perhaps haunting is the realization that memory dissolves into forgetting, not in a clear moment, but in a slow absence that leaves us unsure it was ever there. The monument fades until only faint outlines remain, then until only locals recall, then until no one remembers it at all. And finally, the riverbed or the salt plain or the melt-fed valley holds only stones with no story left to connect them. Could it be that this is how most civilizations fall? Not because they were erased suddenly, but because water and ice unraveled them too slowly to notice? To think of meltwaters as archivists feels unsettling. They keep and they erase at the same time. They hold layered histories in ice, but flow downstream with forgotten stories dissolving along the way. Perhaps that is how Earth remembers. Not as permanence, but as fragments scattered across its systems, enough to hint but never enough to fully restore. And yet, if even monuments carved for eternity can be dissolved in the indifference of water and ice, then what hope do we have for knowledge itself, for words and stories more fragile than stone, for vanished memories that never etch their traces into rock? Perhaps the answer lies deeper, at scales smaller than carvings or fossils, bound within the architecture of atoms themselves. Here, in the unhurried physics of decay, a library exists that does not require ink or inscription. A library of isotopes, written in the subtle changes of elements, where radioactivity itself becomes timekeeper, scribe, and archivist. The Earth's crust is filled with these atomic records. Uranium, locked into minerals, decays slowly into lead, ticking with intervals more patient than civilizations, more measured than any calendar humanity has ever built. By tracing the ratios of parent to daughter, we can read spans of billions of years with quiet precision. Rocks older than life itself hold stories no monument could rival, carrying testimonies of ancient continents, vanished oceans, and atmospheres that bore none of the oxygen we now breathe. These isotopic clocks mark boundaries of time far beyond the rise and fall of civilizations, far beyond even the scope of species. They are patient reminders that endings can be calculated, that even silence holds numbers inside. Carbon tells stories closer to home. All living things absorb it. Within every creature, every plant, every breath, a fraction of carbon exists in an unstable isotope, carbon-14. Once life ends, that exchange with the atmosphere stops. The clock begins to tick with gentle decline, half-life after half-life, until the ratio marks how long it has been since life was present. Archaeologists use it to date bones, shells, fragments of wood. But really, it is the memory of starlight, for carbon-14 is forged by cosmic rays interacting with nitrogen high in the atmosphere. A gift from the sky, etched into every leaf and every heart, carrying within it a record of presence and departure. Perhaps it is not only biology but the cosmos itself that insists on remembering us. Even in ice, isotopes write chronologies. Layers of snow pressed into glaciers retain not only trapped air bubbles, archives of atmosphere long gone, but ratios of oxygen and hydrogen isotopes that reveal temperature shifts in exquisite detail. Warm ages, cold snaps, centuries of drought or flood, all layered flat like pages in ice. Scientists drill cores and count not only rings of snow but vibrations in element ratios, and in doing so they read time's hidden diary. The glacier itself remembers what forests cannot, what monuments cannot, what even dust forgets. Perhaps the isotopes are memory in its purest form, impartial, unwavering, blind to meaning but precise in presence. To think of the Earth this way is to imagine the planet not only as stone and river, but as a being quietly ticking atom by atom. Time does not drift abstractly. It crystallizes into minerals, into decaying atoms, into records so small yet so eternal that human thought trembles at the span. And if intelligence fades, if archives burn, if languages fold back into soil, isotopes remain. Not for us, not for memory as meaning, but for memory as existence. Quiet testaments to what was, carrying records no mind need recognize for them to be true. They will continue whether or not anyone asks their story. And could it be that in a distant epoch, long after us, someone or something might stumble across these isotopic trails? Perhaps not humans, but another intelligence, terrestrial or not, pulling threads of time from atomic clocks preserved beneath the crust. They would learn not just of our age but of all ages before us, of the breath of oxygen that signaled life's first bloom, of the atmospheric collapse that receded Earth's climate, of the geological exhalations that gave rise to and erased entire ecologies. It is strange to realize, our clearest testimony lies not in books, not in monuments, but in the quiet mathematics of decay. Entropy ensures that even clocks decay. Uranium becomes lead, carbon fades to nitrogen, unstable isotopes vanish eventually, ticking until the signal softens. Not because they wish to run out, but because everything, even time's instruments, has a half-life. And therein is a quiet paradox. Isotopes remain long past our lifetimes, but not forever. Their records are finite like all memory. Perhaps this is their most human quality, their reminder that nothing, not even memory itself, escapes impermanence. Maybe this, too, is part of the lesson, that nothing survives unchanged, that decay is the key by which time makes itself visible. And so the library of isotopes is not one of permanence, but one of patient unfolding. A sentence written in one atom, continued in another, read across whole worlds if only we slow ourselves enough to hear it. It is not monoliths that grant Earth its memory, nor fossils alone, nor ruined cities. It is this quiet ticking, patient and invisible, that clarifies endings, that marks beginnings, that tells us, without judgment, that a story happened here, at this exact time, though the storyteller may be gone. And yet, if memory is carried even in the smallest atoms, if loss itself can be measured in isotopic trails, then what happens to the layers buried so deeply they are not read at all? Does forgetting persist in stone as surely as remembering, hiding beneath pressures and depths where no one may ever look? And yet, if memory is carried even in the smallest atoms, if loss itself can be measured in isotopic trails, then what happens to the layers buried so deeply they are not read at all? Forgetting, too, is part of the Earth's language. Sediments accumulate slowly, grains drifting from rivers, dust settling from skies, volcanic ash blanketing the surface. Each new layer presses into the one below, and in that pressure, memory begins to blur. This is how forgetting happens in geology, not by fire consuming everything at once, but by the weight of time folding one story beneath another until even presence feels erased. Imagine a city falling to silence. Walls crumble, wood softens, foundations collapse into themselves. Dust gathers, storms scatter fragments, and eventually soil closes over the streets. What was once vibrant becomes featureless ground, grass bending in the wind above it. But below, beneath the surface, fragments remain compressed, carried down by sediment's slow hand. Bones, bricks, pottery, even traces of paint, all compacted into a chorus too faint to hear. A city becomes dust, dust becomes soil, soil becomes stone. And in stone, the meaning is rewritten, no longer recognizable as city but as stratum, another chapter buried deep beneath the present. This burial does not mean disappearance. It means translation, though in a language we may never be able to read. Sediments do not ask permission. They do what they must, pressing the old into the body of the earth. Fossils form this way. Ancient forests buried by rivers transform into coal seams. Shell beds compressed into limestone no longer resemble seas. Yet they are seas all the same, rewritten in a new alphabet of mineral signatures. Perhaps forgetting, then, is not failure of memory but its metamorphosis. Could it be that stone forgets in order to remember differently? Maybe what looks like absence is a form of preservation too deep, too compressed, for recognition. Yet still loss is present. Languages vanish when the layers over them grow too thick. No one remembers which name belonged to which hill. No one recalls which symbol traced which story. Entropy ensures that fine details dissolve first. Fibers, pigments, soft tissue, all gone before stone hardens. What remains is outline, hardness, the barest fragments that can survive compression. From these we reconstruct as best we can, but so much has been folded back into silence that most of the story remains hidden. The archive of the Earth is vast, but it is also selective. Keeps some, it discards more. Forgetting in layers is how it moves forward. And when we look back on vanished worlds through the lens of geology, our view is skewed by these absences. We marvel at the fossils of dinosaurs, but entire lineages left none. We trace the marks of early humans, though most of their traces were erased centuries before sediment could preserve them. Countless civilizations may have risen and fallen with no footprint left to speak for them. Could it be, then, that whole stories, entire epochs, are already gone from Earth's memory, lost beneath the thickness of layers, erased not in fire but in burial? Maybe the greatest silence of deep time is not in catastrophe, but in slow compression, the weight of forgetting turning culture, language, presence into anonymity. Yet even in this forgetting, there is continuity. What is lost feeds into what comes after. Cities decay into soil where new forests root. Forests erode into sediments where fossils form. Sediments press into rock where isotopes tell their own tales. Even forgetting becomes a form of becoming. Still, the thought shadows us. To be buried is not to vanish, but to be remade past recognition. What we call erasure may simply be the Earth's patience, rewriting until our words are indistinct, folded into its language, where no one remembers the original form. And yet, if forgetting is as constant as remembering, if layers of time fold over us until our outlines blur, then how much of our own present will endure at all? Perhaps very little, for even the Earth itself seems restless in its memory, as though time were not only archive but dream. Climate has never been steady, always cycles, always flux, ice rolling in like a tide, then retreating, deserts opening then closing, storms filling skies only to dissolve into drought. If forgetting can be pressed into stone, then perhaps remembering is stitched into climate, a restless pattern unfolding again and again. What if Earth itself dreams, and we are only faint details in the passing sequences of those dreams? We are accustomed to thinking of climate as background, as atmosphere, as something solid and dependable because it feels still within our lifetimes. But in geologic time, it is not background at all. It is the main character, unpredictable and shifting. Ice ages arrive with rhythms subtle and slow, measured by the tilting of Earth's axis, by the stretch of its orbit, by slight wobbles we scarcely imagine. With each tilt and stretch and wobble, sunlight is redistributed, glaciers expand, oceans fall, continents connect. Then, with equal persistence, they retreat. The glaciers melt, seas rise, forests spread across tundra once more. For species, these shifts feel catastrophic. Entire biomes erased, ecosystems remade. For Earth, they are only rhythms, breath half asleep. Volcanic pulses rewrite climates too, waves of ash darkening skies. For years after an eruption, sunlight dims, crops fail, temperatures plunge into sudden winters. Then fire exhales carbon dioxide for centuries more, warming the globe long after the ash has blown away. Layers of basalt in the geological record tell of these fiery chapters. Immense outpourings like flood basalts that tilted the carbon cycle so far they seeded extinctions. Perhaps Earth's fever dreams are not always gentle. Sometimes they burn so harshly they scorch whole ages into silence. And then there are warmer dreams, greenhouse ages, vast epochs where carbon concentration soared, where palm trees grew near the Arctic Circle, where crocodiles basked in polar rivers. In these epochs, ice was absent entirely, forgotten from Earth's vocabulary. Oceans climbed high, continents drifted apart, the air heavy with breath that unraveled glaciers before they could even form. To us, such warmth would be disaster. To Earth, it was simply another chapter, another oscillation in the shifting dream of climate. Could it be that we, our entire history, occupy nothing more than a fragile pause between these larger rhythms? Our civilization arose during an interglacial, a brief span of warmth within a broader ice age cycle. Perhaps all our stories are notes in the margin of a climate dream too large to notice us. The Holocene, our epic of agriculture and culture, is only 10,000 years old. To geology, it is an exhale between the glacier's stern inhales. Are we, then, not builders of permanence, but a footnote woven into a fleeting climatic sigh? Maybe, maybe not. But the thought softens perspective. The record of these dreams rests in isotopes, in stalactites bearing traces of rainfall, in ocean sediments charting the oscillation of warmth and cold. It rests too in fossils, the shifting species marking eras of abundance followed by sudden stresses. What we remember as history, Earth remembers as climate rhythm. While we treat drought or storm as exceptional, the stone and ice see them as familiar signatures repeating endlessly. The dream does not pause for us. It only passes through us, reshaping our lives as it continues along a path too long for us to imagine fully. And if Earth dreams in ice and fire, in drought and flood, what does that dream feel like? Perhaps every glacier is a slow thought cooling over eons. Perhaps every eruption is a nightmare breath. Perhaps every warm, quiet interlude is the planet sighing into stillness before stirring again. Some dreams take centuries, some millions of years, but all drift forward, reshaping memory while leaving behind layers we call archives. Could it be that we mistake these markings for deliberate records, when really they are the accidental fragments of a dream half-remembered? And so we find ourselves in a strange position. To us, climate feels fragile, endangered, mortal. To Earth, climate feels restless, inevitable, insistent. It will change whether or not we exist. It will dream whether or not we interpret its patterns. If we vanish, its oscillations will continue. Its rhythms will persist, new layers forming over ours until our portion fades to quiet irrelevance. And yet, if the planet's memory is a restless dreamscape, shifting ceaselessly through climates too large for us to see, then what happens after we are gone? What if the dream continues without us, flowing forward as softly as it always has, erasing our presence while carrying our materials into new forms? For it is certain that our absence, though profound to us, would only become a small paragraph in the greater story of Earth. Forests would reclaim what we leave behind. Steel would rust quietly beneath vines. Coral would lace around harbors where ships once moored, turning forgotten piers into fragile reefs. Skyscrapers, unruly and immense today, would be softened first by wind and rain, then folded into rubble, then into sediment, indistinguishable in time from ordinary cliffs. The planet would continue, reshaping itself in our absence, with no need for our witness. It is a humbling thought. Our ending is not Earth's ending. Already, ruins whisper this truth. Cities like Chernobyl and Pripyat, where trees nest in apartments, deer wander through old schools, moss presses against concrete. The wild persists in the cracks of our absence. And in deep time, that same indifference only grows broader. It is not dramatic collapse that swallows humanity's memory, but the slow succession of life stepping back into the spaces we believed were ours alone. Forests, given centuries without us, would spread vast once more, climbing over collapsed bridges, crowning highways with root and branch. Wolves would hunt in suburbs. Rivers would cut through avenues where asphalt fails. Within oceans, corals may rise upon our artificial reefs, layering shipwreck and seawall into brilliant living structures, binding what was human into what is natural again. Could it be that humanity's most lasting contribution to marine life will be not our pollution, but our ruins, ports and pillars dissolving into homes for fish, barnacles, sponges, coral polyps building their skeletons one calcium breath at a time? In deserts, the story would be different. Glass would be claimed not by root but by sand. Sandstorms scouring panels of windows into dunes of powdered shards. Steel girders bending beneath heat until they collapse. Over millennia, what was angular and exact flattens, returning to patternless rubble. The city, bristling and proud, becomes soft in its forgetting, buried wholly under the patience of shifting dunes. Even the most imposing monuments, our towers, dams, and statues, would not resist entropy's hand for long. Perhaps in 10,000 years, fragments of foundation remain. In 10 million, even fragments are folded into sedimentary stone. Geology ensures that even in our absence, the planet remains restless. Tectonic plates will not pause for us. Mountains will continue their lifting and their erosion. The Andes will rise, the Himalayas will shift, the oceans will open and close. Subduction will carry our technofossils, a vein of plastic and alloy fragment, into the mantle where heat melts it down, obliterating the last geometry of our design. It is strange to imagine. Our debris, scattered so thoroughly now, returning someday to magma, not by sudden violence, but by slow descent beneath continents, pressed and remade into mineral indistinguishable from normal stone. But Earth's resilience is not only geological. It is biological too. Across epochs, each extinction has been followed by renewal, each collapse folded into new beginnings. After the Cretaceous ended with shadow, the mammals multiplied into niches left by dinosaurs. After the Permian silence, ecosystems arose anew, delicate then, but persistent nonetheless. So too, after we are gone, something else will stir. Life does not require us. It requires time, breathing space, and opportunity. Even if we erased ourselves abruptly, there would still be microbes beneath the soils, plankton in the seas, seeds held dormant until light returned. Life waits endlessly for chances to begin again. Yet what fascinates most is the thought of memory. Our cultures, our languages, our music, our words, all are fragile, dissolving long before stone yields. Books turn to dust, circuits corrode, networks fade almost instantly without human caretakers. What remains are the physical traces. Dams becoming river rocks, cities rewriting themselves as cliffs, plastics embedded in sediment layers. Our memory without us becomes geology, indifferent and untranslatable. Could it be that our greatest achievements, the stories of our civilizations, will be less enduring than the roots of a pine or the shell of a clam fossilized in limestone? And still, perhaps that is the natural order. Perhaps intelligence always fades faster than matter. Perhaps self-awareness is only a spark, brief against the billions of years of Earth's endurance. To vanish is not failure, but inevitability. The record of Earth shows that countless worlds of living dreams have come and gone before us, their traces faint, their presence erased. And one day, our world, shaped by human ambition, will join them, dissolved into stone. This thought, unsettling yet gentle, suggests something we hesitate to accept. Earth's final curtain does not arrive with our absence. The planet moves onward, carrying our fragments, rewriting our structures, sustaining life until the sun itself changes the rules. Our chapter is small, our influence immense but temporary, our silence certain. After we are gone, Earth continues as it always has, rebalancing, rewriting, respiring slowly across eons. And yet, if our absence is so easily absorbed, if the forests and the seas and the deserts simply continue without us, then what shape do the continents themselves carry forward? For even without us, the Earth is never still. Beneath its quiet surfaces lies a restlessness of stone, a slow crawl of tectonic plates that shifts the planet's face through time. Maps are not permanent, though we hold them as if they were. They are only brief arrangements in a far older dance, a choreography that takes hundreds of millions of years to cycle through even once. Today, we see the continents shaped in familiar outlines. Africa with its vast deserts, Asia with its mountains folding like great wrinkles, South America tapering into the southern seas. But deep within the mantle, convection currents stir with steady heat, pulling plates inches a year, no faster than fingernails grow, yet relentless, unstoppable. With each inch, coastlines stretch, mountain ranges crumble, oceans open and close. If we could watch on the canvas of deep time, the continents would not appear fixed at all. They would flow like rafts across the surface, colliding, parting, reforming again and again. 250 million years into the future, the Earth may look so different we would barely recognize it. Simulations suggest new supercontinents will form, whether Pangaea Ultima, clustering landmasses into a vast central desert, or Amasia, gathered near the North Pole, or Nova Pangaea, stretched long and thin by widening ocean rifts. Names do not matter, for they are only labels for rehearsals of the same ancient cycle. What we know for certain is that the Earth grows restless with its surface, endlessly rearranging it. The Atlantic Ocean, still widening now, might one day close again, with the Americas colliding back into Africa and Europe. The Pacific, so immense, might vanish altogether as island arcs and coastlines fuse. Mountains will surge again where seas once rolled, and valleys will sink where once towers of granite stood. To imagine this future is to realize that what feels permanent to us, the Himalayas, the Andes, the Mississippi, the Mediterranean, is only temporary punctuation in a cycle hundreds of millions of years long. Fossils locked in ancient strata tell us that once the Sahara Desert was green and wet, ferns swaying in humid forests. Once the Himalayas did not exist at all. Once Antarctica was not covered in ice but in forests of beach. The continents drift, and with them, every ecosystem, every climate, every possibility of life. Perhaps the transformations we fear as endings are simply parts of this larger rhythm, unfolding too slowly for us to grasp within lifetimes. And still, the thought unsettles. If in 250 million years, the shapes we recognize vanish, then who will remember this world's face? Perhaps no one. Perhaps memory itself is lost beneath shifting oceans. Our mountain ranges ground to dust, our cities folded into subducted crust, our coastlines forgotten as new oceans split elsewhere. Maybe memory is not even necessary at that scale. Maybe, to Earth, recognition is irrelevant. Change is its only fidelity. Science reads these possibilities with care. Magnetic minerals frozen in lava flows tell us where rocks once pointed toward the poles. Fossil shells reveal ocean depths that no longer exist. Isotopic trails in sediments chart the rise and fall of seas, the expansion of continents, the collision of landmasses long since separated. In piecing them together, we watch Earth's outlines flow, the choreography repeating itself across deep time. What is remarkable is not the detail but the certainty. Continents drift, oceans open and close, mountains rise and fall. The planet remodels itself endlessly, each transformation erasing an old world to create a new. But if endings are only transformations we do not live to see, does that mean nothing ever truly ends, or that everything ends too slowly for us to notice? Could it be that permanence itself is only illusion, that what we mistake for stability is only pause? Our homes, our borders, our coastlines, none are eternal. Beneath them, stone remembers differently, sliding onward with indifference. Perhaps the truth is simple. The Earth has no map. It only has moments, arrangements of land and sea, temporary until the crust demands another line. And so, when the continents come together again into some unfamiliar embrace, forests and deserts and oceans remade around their shapes, it will not be the end of the planet. It will only be another exhale, another slow rearrangement in an endless cycle. The Earth's face will utterly change, but the rhythm behind that change will be the same rhythm that has always been present, patient and restless beneath our feet. And yet, if the continents themselves can be swallowed, crushed, and remade, what of what lies beneath them? What of the fires below, the mantle shifting through eons, the molten ocean we almost never think about? An ocean made not of water, but of restless stone. And yet, if the continents themselves can be swallowed, crushed, and remade, what of what lies beneath them? What of the engine that makes them drift at all? Beneath the granite calm of the crust, deep below the landscapes we know, lies the mantle, an ocean of fire not in water, but in restless stone, moving continents like rafts adrift on a hidden tide. To think of it is to imagine stillness above and motion below, a paradox that reminds us that all permanence is an illusion. The mountain seems eternal, but it rides silently on molten currents, carried like a piece of driftwood. This ocean of fire does not burn in flames. It seethes in slow motion, heat rising from Earth's core, convection shaping the crust. Magma swells upward, creating ridges where new seafloor spreads. Elsewhere, it pulls plates downward, subducting them into trenches, recycling whole continents into molten anonymity. This cycle is the Earth's heartbeat, expansion, destruction, renewal, repeated over tens and hundreds of millions of years. Life depends on this rhythm. Without it, landscapes would stagnate, mountains would never rise, nutrients would never circulate to renew oceans. The fire below is not only destructive, but life-giving. Could it be that every forest owes some measure of its existence to volcanoes, to upwellings of mantle currents, to ash spilled in the air above? Volcanoes are the visible edge of this hidden ocean, the rare moments when the mantle writes directly onto the surface. Each eruption, violent yet inevitable, is a reminder that beneath us lies not silence, but a restless tide shaped by heat older than life itself. Lava cooled into basalt records those pulses, frozen waves telling of ancient surges that no one witnessed. If we dig into the layers, basalt plateaus reveal entire chapters written by outpourings that lasted for centuries, drowning landscapes, altering climates, seeding extinction itself. The mantle's dreams are not measured in our time, but in chapters as long as ages. And still, for all its power and movement, this ocean of fire will not last forever. Heat is energy, and energy dissipates. Slowly, over billions of years, the Earth cools. The mantle thickens, grows sluggish. Tectonic plates, once drifting ceaselessly, will still, and the crust will quiet. The heartbeat of the Earth, its inner circulation, will fade. No more continents drifting, no new mountains rising, no volcanoes pouring rivers of fire into the sky. Land will become static, oceans shallow, erosion erasing without replacement. The planet will enter its long stillness, the fire beneath exhausted, remembered only faintly in fossilized ridges and extinct volcanoes standing lifeless in silent rows. But what would that stillness feel like? Perhaps the planet will seem older in a way we cannot yet understand. Not because time has stopped, but because motion has ended. Mountains worn down without renewal, valleys filling slowly without disruption. Could it be that life itself, reliant on renewal from within, will then struggle against the stillness? Without tectonics, without recycling clay and minerals, without CO2 returning from the crust, perhaps Earth's breath will fade into silence. Entropy, inevitable and patient, will claim even the fire beneath our feet. And here we are, living on borrowed warmth, each volcano, each drifting plate, each tremor reminding us that Earth is alive with inner tides. We walk upon floating shells, unaware most days of the heat just beyond reach, the molten ocean threading currents slow as thought itself. We imagine the surface as the world, solid and enduring, but the world includes this hidden sea. And when it stills, when the last heat disperses and the mantle becomes locked in place, the Earth itself will change from a restless body into a quiet stone, carved only by wind and star, no longer by inner breath. And yet, if the planet's heartbeat is destined one day to fade with cooling fire, then might its final gesture not be flame at all, but quiet instead. A hush that settles across the globe as tectonics freeze and the long silence begins? Some imagine that before the sun swells, Earth may grow old in another way, not through burning but through slowing, a hush that arrives from within. Tectonics tiring, the crust no longer shifting, continents fixed in place. Volcanoes silent, the plates once restless, locked forever. Beneath such stillness, something enormous would change. For even if mountains remained, they would never rise again. Even if oceans endured, they would never open or close. A kind of geological stillness, a permanent pause, as though the Earth itself had exhaled for the last time. When tectonics slow, the magnetic shield weakens too. For it is the molten movement of Earth's iron heart that stirs magnetic fields, wrapping us in protection from the solar winds. With time, as the inner dynamo cools, that shield may falter and collapse, leaving the upper air bare before the sun's quiet stripping. The atmosphere, once thick with breath, may unravel into space, molecule by molecule drifting away into the dark. The soundless loss of gas to the void. Oxygen, carbon dioxide, nitrogen. All the air we take for granted, gone, leaving a planet bare, wrapped not in sky but in silence. Could it be that long before fire swallows us, it is vacuum that claims us? The glaciers, no longer balanced by heat and movement, would sink into permanence, not cycle. With no fresh volcanism, no carbon cycle to stir gases back into the air, ice may spread unchecked once again, until Earth is locked in perpetual frost. Not the ice ages we have known, which come and go in breath-like patterns, but something stiller. A ball of frozen stone, seas sealed under white caps, winds stilled by lack of atmosphere, forests already gone, oceans shrinking under skies too thin to hold rain. It would be a world that does not burn, but freezes in place. A memorial cold enough to seem timeless, even as time itself continues pressing forward quietly. Here, entropy shows its subtler hand. Not destruction in sudden violence, but dissolution through absence. Processes unraveling because the balance of heat and shield has unwound too far. Even decay has a rhythm and order. Earth's quiet freeze would be the rhythm stretched to its last measures. Not because the universe has turned away, but because energy has drifted outward, leaving the planet as hushed as stone in deep night. Maybe memory, too, dissolves here, carried away with the atmosphere, hidden in the endless frost. And yet, even in such an endgame, traces remain. Fossils locked in permafrost until permafrost itself sinks into rock. Cities entombed in ice that will never melt again. Oceans trapped as ghost seas beneath frozen surfaces. The record of forests and deserts sealed so fully that no one will ever break the crust to read them. When warmth departs, preservation becomes eternal. A still museum of geology where nothing moves again. Could it be that the quiet freeze, though lifeless, becomes the most complete archive of all? Perhaps Earth's silence itself would fossilize, preserved not in words or isotopes but in layers locked permanently in place. An unfinished book sealed forever closed. There is quiet poetry in imagining this. A world of absolute stillness beneath a wan, aging Sunday. No tides, no eruptions, no storms, only the occasional tremor as rock contracts in cold, a faint sound swallowed by the ice. If such silence arrived, would Earth's presence feel less like a planet and more like a monument? A gravestone adrift in orbit, remembering nothing, carrying everything inside, unmoving. Not because it chose to, but because time made the choice for it. A monument with no one left to mourn. And what of its face then? Perhaps pale deserts, covered in frost, stretching lifeless across the surface. Perhaps the trace of oceans visible only as scars, pale rings around continents once drowned. Perhaps the last mountains, softened, rounded, abraded by icy winds until even they vanish, leaving only plain upon plain of still earth, stone flat and silent. The colors would fade too. No greens of forest, no blues of ocean, only whites of ice and grays of stone, dimly lit beneath a sun that burns brighter but feels colder. For there is no voice left here to feel its warmth. Is this how endings look? Not rupture, not climax, but tapering into silence? A vanishing of sound, of heat, of atmosphere, until the planet itself becomes an inert witness, watching nothing, heard by no one? It is hard to accept such an ending, and yet harder to deny. We live upon a restless body, warmed by fires and shielded by magnetic breath. But if those foundations falter, life falters too, and the earth itself slides into a quieter age, one that carries no speech and no renewal. And yet, if this is the fate awaiting Earth, then what sound, what memory, will remain after silence takes hold? Will some record still endure in fossils, in dust zipped tight between layers of frozen rock? Or does the freeze mark not preservation but the first steps into a deeper unraveling, when even cooling stone forgets itself against the fire of an aging sun? And yet, if this is the fate awaiting Earth, frozen, stripped of breath, silenced beneath a pale sun, then what traces of life will still endure? What will whisper across that stillness, when oceans are gone and forests have long since folded back into dust? Perhaps the answer lies in fossils yet to come, echoes waiting to be discovered by eyes not ours, perhaps by no eyes at all. For even in death, some beings lend to stone the outline of their existence, shaping the geology of tomorrow. Fossils are, in many ways, echoes caught in mineral form. They are not life, but shadows of it, pressed into sediment, preserved in detail when chance allows. Shells turned to stone, bones replaced by quartz, the fine veins of leaves etched into shale, delicate as breath frozen. It is a reminder that the great majority of life leaves no fossil behind. Most vanish completely, unrecorded. But a few, just a small fraction, slip through the sieve of entropy and into permanence. Could it be that some among us, some creatures alive today, will leave their whispers for the far future to find? Imagine a whale skeleton sinking to the seafloor, as it has always done. The body feeds abyssal scavengers, its bones slowly mineralizing in soft mud, compacted by sediments drifting endlessly over it. In a million years, perhaps those bones transform into stone, an imprint of whales long vanished, discovered by someone or something, digging through layers of forgotten seas. What would they make of this silence? Would they see an age of plenty in our oceans? Or would they notice that the layer containing whales abruptly vanishes, heralding extinction? Or consider birds, their hollow bones fragile, yet occasionally preserved in lake beds and river mud. Could future layers reveal the forms of pigeons, gulls, sparrows, the common creatures of our time, pressed beside fragments of human debris? A plastic bottle fused into the same stone as a bird's wing, an uncanny combination, telling a story we never wrote consciously but left nevertheless. To those who find them, would such juxtapositions appear mysterious, even myth-like? Perhaps they would ask what story ended here and why so suddenly. Even our own bones may become fossils, though not many. In deep time, cemeteries dissolve, coffins rot, cities break down too fast to preserve detail. But chance deposits, a body swept into a sediment-filled cave, a collapse covering a shelter in silt, might preserve outlines of our kind. Not many, not clearly, but enough for some future reader of stone to know we were here. And what would they think, seeing not just us, but our technologies interlaced into the fossil record? Not only bones, but the gears of watches, the shards of glass, the imprints of shoes hardened into conglomerates with seashells. Fossils not only of creatures, but of their tools, their inventions, their mess. And even as most life vanishes completely, the chemistry of fossils persists as a ghost record. Isotopes inside tooth enamel tell of what creatures ate, what climates they lived in, what waters they drank. The carbon in their bones carries the fingerprints of atmosphere at their time of living. Future beings, if any exist to study it, would not simply find fossils as shapes, but as data, traces encoded in atomic ratios. Entire atmospheres might be reconstructed from the marrow of long-dead animals, entire climates guessed from the chemistry of shells settled long before. This is the strange generosity of fossils. They carry more than form, they carry conditions, environments, whole vanished skies, if only we learn how to listen. But fossils, too, are fragile promises. For every skeleton we imagine preserved, countless others will disintegrate before burial, or else erode after. Entire ecosystems may leave no fossil memory at all, passing into nothingness except as influences faintly visible in what survived around them. Could it be that the fossil record is less a memory and more a rumor, telling us fragments while keeping most of the truth to itself? Perhaps what fossils of tomorrow will offer the future is not completion, but puzzle pieces, scattered echoes too few to complete the image. And yet, there is beauty in this incompleteness. Just as we dig up ammonites and wonder about oceans that no longer exist, so too may distant minds uncover whales turned to stone, birds pressed into shale, even fragments of human life. They will try to piece together a story, as we do, and they will discover patterns of sudden silence in the fossil record. They will notice that countless species once abundant vanish all at once, coinciding with signs of fire, plastic, soot, thin layers rich in carbon. Won't they wonder how such a flourishing world ended in silence so quickly? And won't they feel, perhaps, the same melancholy awe we feel now when looking back into Earth's previous extinctions? The Earth, frozen or burning, silenced or restless, will still carry these echoes in stone. Fossils yet to be, whispers waiting in layers. Only a fraction will endure, only fragments noticed, yet they will tell enough. enough to know life was here, enough to ask questions with no full answers. And perhaps that is the point of fossils all along, not to provide closure, but to preserve open mysteries, so that every reader of stone must lean closer into time's silence. And yet, if fossils can echo forward into unrecognizable futures, then could entire civilizations, built before us, already lie hidden beneath strata, erased except for fragments we cannot interpret? The thought drifts quietly, half unsettling, half wondrous, that perhaps we are not the first, and that others may have risen long before, erased so thoroughly that only geology now carries the faintest whisper of their existence. Speculation whispers in science and myth alike. We often ask, if a civilization as vast as ours had flourished millions of years ago, how would we know? Most assume its presence would be obvious, its ruins preserved, its artifacts enduring. Yet the truth runs differently. The earth is unkind to permanence. Stone swallows memory. Oceans bury coasts. Volcanoes grind landscapes to ash. Entire continents are erased under plates, subducted into the mantle where molten heat rewrites them into fire. Cities, no matter how proud, erode into dust in mere thousands of years. Millions of years, by geological measure, are merciless. Could it be, then, that traces did once exist but passed already beyond our reach? We dig ruins and find pottery, coins, bones arranged in rhythm with once living hands. But extend the timescale further, and pottery crumbles, coins oxidize, bones vanish. Even our skyscrapers, resilient though they seem, would not survive 10 million years intact. Erosion would collapse them, water dissolve them, tectonics sweep them under in inevitable recycling. Memory becomes geology, stripped of intention. If entire civilizations existed before us, built on cycles of deep time, their material might be gone now, incorporated into the very stones we stand on. Perhaps their roads are now limestone ridges. Perhaps their monuments are nothing more than folded strata within mountain walls. And still, there might be subtle traces, layers with anomalous chemistry, unusual spikes in carbon, metals arranged in combinations nature seldom forms. It is here some scientists speculate, wondering whether our own Anthropocene layer, rich in plastic, soot, technofossils, may be mirrored by others somewhere deep in rock. The Earth's archive is imperfect, scattered, selective. Extinctions leave boundaries marked by iridium or carbon. Civilizations, if ancient beyond our imagination, might leave thin seams of chemistry without detail. A phantom record impossible to read fully but impossible to dismiss entirely. Could it be that curiosity itself survives best, as we keep asking whether others walked here long before? What unsettles is the silence of certainty. No matter how far we dig, questions grow instead of shrinking. Patterns in carbon cycles suggest sudden shifts in climate tens of millions of years ago. Causes are proposed: volcanoes, impacts, natural oscillations. But what if, hidden faintly within those records, is evidence of something else? Not conclusive, but suggestive, a memory mistaken for nature when perhaps it was culture? We cannot answer. Stone does not ask to be read clearly. It offers fragments, shreds, rhythms, but never confessions. Perhaps then, the deeper point is that we might not be unique in being forgotten. If other civilizations once stood beneath us, and all memory of them has folded into silence, then our eventual erasure feels less like tragedy and more like cycle. Maybe Earth does not keep civilizations so much as digest them, drawing them back into itself, leaving future generations or no generations to wonder. Memory as sediment, never story. And still, there is comfort woven here. If others have been erased, if memory dissolves so fully, then perhaps disappearance is not failure but continuity. To rise and fall may be as natural as forests burning and regrowing, seas advancing and retreating, mountains crumbling then lifting. Civilization itself may be one of Earth's many experiments, fleeting yet vivid, destined always to fade back into minerals, leaving only questions behind. Maybe meaning does not survive in monuments, but in the act of wondering whether monuments ever stood at all. And yet, if the Earth has buried all rhythms so deeply that we cannot find them, what then of wisdom? Is knowledge another sediment to dissolve when civilizations are gone, or might fragments of forgotten understanding still wait within us, carried forward without memory of their origins? For just as species vanish, just as continents redraw, so too does knowledge fall to silence. Libraries burn, languages vanish, traditions fracture and scatter into dust. Knowledge itself is not immune to extinction. We prefer to think of ideas as eternal, enduring through retelling, but history whispers otherwise. Entire tongues once spoken are now mute, their vocabularies unreadable, their songs silenced into undeciphered script carved in clay or scratched into stone. Under ashes in Mesopotamia lie words we can no longer pronounce. In jungles, temples encased in vines hold rituals no living voice recalls. What is more fragile? Bone, which may harden to stone, or language, which vanishes simply by absence of a listener? Perhaps extinction is not only biological but cultural, carried not by fire or ice but by forgetting. The earth holds record of forgotten wisdom too, though not in words. Knowledge of medicines once grown, routes once mapped by the stars, techniques etched into craftwork. These dissolve faster than fossils. They may last in fragments. A tool, a fragment of scroll, a carved diagram no longer interpretable. We find them, we study them, but so often we do not see the whole. Could it be that the greater part of human existence is already lost to us? That more of our past is unknowable than known? Maybe forgetting is the normal state, with memory drifting like small islands above a wider sea of silence. Entropy ensures this unraveling. Ideas need voices to survive. When voices lose their chain of teachers, ideas fade. Every village elder once stored libraries within memory, reciting the histories of kin, the maps of rivers, the knowledge of seasons. When those voices went quiet, their archives vanished with them. Not because the earth wished to erase them, but because silence is the nature of time. Could it be that buried civilizations once carried wisdom we cannot imagine? Mathematics, sciences, philosophies, dissolved already into mere mineral signatures? And so we see that even great libraries are only brittle shelters. The blaze of Alexandria, the collapse of palatial archives, the scattered codices devoured by climate or conquest, all whisper the same truth. Knowledge erodes as easily as stone. A fragment may endure, a whisper of geometry or a myth retold, but the full lineage is snapped, no longer continuous. And yet those fragments still shape us. A single scroll can influence centuries, even while thousands were lost. Perhaps the weight of forgotten wisdom is not only in absence but in the way fragments bend us strangely, reshaping us in ways we do not perceive. Science itself rests upon rediscovery. Chemistry layered over alchemy, medicine over folk practice, astronomy emerging out of myth. And still, we must ask, what has been reinvented, and what has been forgotten permanently? How much knowledge existed, folded into traditions we did not preserve? Archaeologists often remark that invention is rarely singular. Human ingenuity arises, disappears, re-arises. Perhaps the repeating ideas in our record are not signs of progress, but whispers of loss. Perhaps civilization is not a ladder continually climbing upward, but a cycle of light and shadow, memory and forgetting, repeating until repetition is mistaken for first invention. Even geology speaks this language. Sediments erase while preserving fragments, compressing forests into coal but losing their swaying movements, their songs of wind. Fossils endure as bones, not as laughter or thought. Likewise, human wisdom can fossilize into tools, buildings, scripts, but not into the living fullness of their use. Could it be that forgotten wisdom is not truly gone but only compressed, awaiting our interpretation? A code we cannot read, a fossil of culture waiting for translation? Or could it be that most is erased entirely, irretrievable forever? Maybe memory is not lost into stone but dissolved into silence, indistinguishable in strata that swallow its last outlines. We feel the weight of forgotten wisdom because we sense its absence daily. Every language unspoken, every library burned, every ritual no longer recalled is a fracture in the continuity of human story. And yet, perhaps this is no different from geology itself, where mountains rise, erode, and vanish, leaving only whispers in sand. Our ideas follow the same law, flowing, fracturing, dispersing. Not because they lacked value, but because value does not grant permanence. Even knowledge bends toward entropy, and still the thought lingers softly. What if forgetting, too, is part of memory? What if fragments preserved, even incompletely, help us dream new forms? Just as fossils are incomplete but still enough to suggest an entire animal, perhaps fragments of wisdom guide us forward, into ideas old and new all at once. Maybe our lack of complete lineage is not failure but possibility. The silence between fragments leaving us space to wonder, to imagine, to begin anew. And yet, if wisdom itself can fracture, just as rock does, just as forests fade and seas retreat, then what of stars, those older witnesses in the sky? Do they too remember? Or are planets more fragile than the memory of the light that shines across them? And yet, if wisdom itself can fracture, just as rock does, just as forests fade and seas retreat, then what of the stars, those older witnesses in the sky? Do they forget as easily as we do? Or are their memories written in a different language, one carried not in stone or sediment, but in light? Against the wide backdrop of space, planets appear fragile, temporary things, brief companions to stars in their longer arcs of endurance. Planets orbit, shift, vanish, collide. They are consumed by hosts, ejected into silence, or stripped bare until only cores remain. Stars last longer, outliving their planets by ages so immense our lives cannot stretch to sense their scale. And in that span, they seem to hold a patience the Earth can never match. Our planet's story is already over halfway written. The sun, still golden and steady, has carried us for 4.5 billion years, and in another 5 it will swell and transform. But stars measure in greater epochs. Their light travels outward long after their surfaces change. A beam reaching our eyes tonight began before our lifetimes, before our civilizations, even before humanity itself emerged. The stars carry memory not in stone, not in silence, but in light that spans across galaxies. What we cannot keep, they send forward endlessly. To look into the night is to witness ancient memory still unfolding. Perhaps the true archive is not Earth at all, but the vault of the sky. Planets are vulnerable archives. They bury fossils only to lose them to subduction. They store atmospheres only to spill them away into space. They let oceans rise and vanish. But stars, while they too shift and end, memorialize differently. They remember in radiation, in the persistence of a journey neither stopped by wind nor eroded by rain. In photons we see not what is, but what was. 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years, sometimes even millions of years, planetary births and deaths witnessed in light long since lost by the source. Could it be that stars function as memory keepers for planets, unwillingly but inevitably, carrying stories their planets cannot preserve? The galaxy does not pause at our extinction. It may not even notice. When Earth cools, when oceans vanish, when tectonics slow, the sun will continue burning brightly, unaware of what fell silent in its orbit. In cosmic timescales, planets are incidental. The true narrative is stellar. The balls of fusion that flare into existence, live brilliantly, then collapse either into quiet embers or into explosions dramatic enough to seed new worlds. Stars erase their planets even as they create conditions for other planets to rise. Memory here is paradoxical. What is burned or destroyed becomes, eventually, the seedbed for something else. Supernovae cast out the iron in our blood, the carbon in our bones. It is an unsettling thought that what remembers us in the farthest future may not be Earth, but the stars that outlive and remake it. And yet stars too die, though more slowly. The sun will swell into a red giant, then collapse into a white dwarf, a dense ember glowing in slow retreat. It will linger for billions of years, cooling silently, until it is only a faint whisper in the dark. Other stars, heavier, collapse more dramatically, scattering matter, flashing memories outward in every direction like signatures across galaxies. Light preserves their memory longer than stone ever could. Where our planet will dissolve unnoticed, The stars will send echoes across unfathomable distances, noticed by no one, but carried nonetheless. Maybe meaning is not required for memory. Maybe light itself is enough. We, in our brevity, look upward and draw constellations, turning patterns into stories. For us, the stars carry myth, direction, beauty. To them, we are nothing. We are the short-lived observers, reading archival light without truly adding to it. And yet, even in our short span, that is enough. To know that the night sky carries fragments older than us is to sense belonging in something vast. To know that star death and star birth recycle endlessly is to glimpse a continuity we cannot hold in time but only in imagination. Our wisdom fades, our buildings crumble, our fossils fracture into dust. But above it all, the stars remain longer, carrying memory into space, long after our planet has swallowed its last breath. And perhaps this is the quietest revelation, that planets may not remember their worlds, but stars remember reflexively, not by choice, but by radiance. Their light records time without asking. It travels outward until absorbed, scattered, or transformed, and in that travel it continues what no library can, to carry a moment forward impossibly far. Could it be that even when Earth is forgotten, the light of its age, the photons reflected from its oceans, from its clouds, from its cities, will still wander outward, etched faintly onto space? Maybe eternal memory is not in rock nor in fossil, but in light already on its way, already untouchable. And yet, if stars outlive their planets, if their light becomes the truest measure of memory, then what might future skies reveal when dust itself begins to settle differently, when echoes of Earth drift into the silence of light that has already left us behind? And yet, if stars outlive their planets, if their light becomes the truest measure of memory, then what of the things too small to shine, the quiet fragments settling around us every day? What of dust, that faint gray veil carried on winds, coating stones and books and window panes, collecting in corners as though gathering stories too subtle for voice? Dust is more than nuisance. It is archive. It carries pollen, spores, grains of soil, and fragments of bone. It carries ceramic shards ground microscopic, concrete eroded into invisible powder, flakes of human skin drifting into sunlight. What we see as insignificance may be the very language of memory at its most delicate scale. Every breath we take includes dust. Every shaft of light through a room reveals specks turning slowly in air, suspended fragments of lives lived long before us. Sahara dust crosses the Atlantic, feeding forests it was never near. Ancient volcanic ash still lingers in high air, drifting endlessly. Even inside Antarctic ice cores, trapped dust tells of deserts alive with wind millions of years ago. Dust learns to speak by traveling, whispering across distance the things stone buries in stillness. It remembers in motion what fossils remember in place. And dust is democratic in its memory. It carries the intimate and the immense together. The pollen of one meadow may mix with the soot of one city, the spores of fungi drifting with fragments of brick. In its blending, dust becomes a kind of chorus, a mingling of times and places. Could it be that dust, more than any monument, holds the truest unbroken memory of the Earth? Not because it is clear or permanent, but because it carries fragments constantly, endlessly across time and place. The story it tells can never be whole, but perhaps wholeness was never Earth's language in the first place. Geologists listen to dust in their way. In cores drilled deep into ocean floor, fine layers of dust record climates. Grains reveal deserts larger or smaller, hinting at ice age winds stronger or weaker, tracking the restless pulse of atmospheric change. Some grains even cross epochs, eroded from ancient rock, carried miles upon miles by storms until finally deposited again into future stone. Dust is the wandering librarian of geology, scattering pages of memory into archives unplanned, unarranged, and yet essential. Maybe we do not need permanence carved into mountainsides. Maybe permanence drifts invisibly through us each day. But dust is not only record. It is also foreshadow. The dust we leave behind will linger, plastics breaking smaller and smaller, concrete grinding into invisible motes, our very buildings and tools destined to dissolve into particles lighter than breath. Future winds will carry this human-made dust across plains long after our voices are gone, scattering technofossils not in monumental chunks but in fragments impossible to erase. Could it be that the story of our era is destined not to remain in skyscrapers but in powders, tiny reminders infiltrating every layer of air, water, stone? Perhaps dust learns to speak most when nothing larger survives. And there is something hypnotic in its presence. To wipe dust from a forgotten shelf is to touch distance itself, the passing of time we did not notice settling quietly before us. To step into a deserted home and see beams of light illuminating motes dancing is to feel the world still whispering in fragments. Dust holds essence of endings without urgency, not because it resists erasure, but because it floats free of permanence, content to move endlessly into silence. If endings could be heard, their sound would not likely be thunder. It would not be roaring collapse. It would be the faint whisper of dust moving across plains emptied of witnesses, a faint brushing rhythm across stone and forgotten ruins, a soft, unending sigh. And yet, if dust learns to speak in whispers, then what might we hear when we turn our gaze outward again, beyond our own particles and ruins, toward the planets around us, silent siblings carrying their own messages of endings written across their surfaces? Mars, pale and dry, a world where rivers once ran but left only scars. Venus, shrouded in storm, heat thick enough to melt lead, a memory of oceans gone, of atmosphere transformed into furnace. Other planets remind us gently, though without words, that endings come in many shapes. Earth, listening, can treat them as elder siblings, older teachers that reveal not futures certain, but futures possible written across alien skies. Mars speaks first, though softly, in traces. Once, there were valleys carved with the patience of rivers. Dried deltas remain, braided fans of sediment frozen into permanence. Minerals whisper water's presence, a chemistry marked by fluid that vanished long ago. To see these rivers is to see not water, but memory of water, like veins of the past left exposed. Could it be that Mars was once as alive as Earth is now, with oceans glittering, storms moving across blue horizons, life perhaps germinating in quiet pools? Maybe, maybe not. But the geology insists, what is dry now was once moving. What is barren now was once shaped by flow. Mars closes its eyes not in one moment, but with a long drying, a climate slipping beyond recovery until silence spread across its surface. Its lesson: sometimes worlds do not burn, but fade. Venus, by contrast, carries a harder memory. Its surface, hidden beneath clouds of acid, is young in geological time, renewed by catastrophic volcanism that resurfaced vast plains. The air presses down with 90 times the weight of ours, heat so unrelenting that it softens metals. And yet, the strangest truth is this: Venus may once have been temperate, may once have had shallow oceans, may once have balanced water and rock as Earth does. Something shifted, perhaps the sun brightening, perhaps runaway greenhouse cycles, and the oceans boiled skyward. Water molecules fractured, hydrogen carried into space, oxygen disappearing into stone. What remained was carbon dioxide, thick and trapping heat, spiraling until equilibrium was impossible. Venus did not fade as Mars did. It was transformed, locked into fever, into a greenhouse so permanent the planet itself glows like warning. Could it be that Venus and Mars together mark the boundaries of Earth's possibilities? The one shriveled by silence, the other suffocated by fire? And then there are even quieter worlds. Mercury, barren from birth, no air to shield or hold memory. Titan, with seas of methane beneath a thick orange sky, perhaps showing how alien chemistry can still mimic Earth's patterns. Europa, with oceans buried beneath ice, still restless in its depth, whispering that even in apparent silence there may be hidden breath. Each world is a reminder of endings, transformations, possibilities. Each reflects some angle of Earth's own fragile balance, as though we are surrounded by mirrors that show not one future, but many. Earth listens not because it fears, but because it belongs to this family of worlds. Planetary science is an archaeology of the solar system, sifting through craters, atmospheres, fault lines, chemical trails. Isotopes on Mars hint at vanished oceans. Clouds on Venus hint at violent carbon shifts. Each clue is not merely theirs but ours, because to know what erased them is to glimpse what could erase us. Maybe that is the role of siblings, to remind one another, silently, of what cannot be seen in a single lifetime. We wonder, could Earth one day mirror Mars, its oceans evaporated, its rivers immortalized only as canyons? Could it mirror Venus, with skies that choke the ground in heat? Is such destiny avoidable, or is it merely postponed? As stars change and atmospheres grow restless, perhaps each ending is inevitable, not by choice but by physics, because climates drift, orbits waver, entropy unravels systems slowly. And yet, between fading and burning, we linger now in the narrow band of balance. Oceans still present, forests still growing, breath still carried in wind. The mirror shows us our future, but also underscores our fragile now. Other worlds reveal that endings wear many costumes. Some end in ice, some in fire, some in silence so barren it feels infinite. Earth, still warm, still breathing, is temporary in its balance. The lesson of Mars and Venus, Mercury and Titan, Europa and beyond, is not that we will share their exact fate, but that all planets close their eyes one way or another. The only uncertainty is which closing belongs to us. And yet, if other worlds carry such stern warnings in their skies and stones, then what of the last rains waiting here, the final drops destined to fall on Earth's surface before silence takes their place? For everything we know, forests, rivers, oceans, even our very breath, depends on water's patience. And one day, though not within our span, not even within our species' span, the last cycle will close. The clouds will form one final time. The winds will turn and lift. A storm may gather somewhere across a barren plain, and from it, the last rain will fall upon Earth. After that, silence will stretch forever across its surface. We rarely imagine rain as finite. To us, it feels eternal. Droplets on rooftops, rivers swelling in flood, oceans always feeding the sky and returning, rhythm after rhythm. But rain is only the surface expression of a planet's breath. And like any breath, it can pause and it can cease. As the sun grows warmer, as the oceans slowly evaporate and drift skyward, the cycle becomes fragile. Atmosphere grows dense, then thin until water molecules break apart beneath ultraviolet light, their hydrogen flung into space. The great cycle of ocean to sky to stream is weakened first by drought, then by disappearance. Imagine rivers running shallower each century, lakes shrinking from their edges inward, seas leaving behind salt plains white as bone, until finally, only the smallest chances of rain remain, brief storms, scattered clouds. And then the last. What would it feel like to witness the last rain? Perhaps it would not declare itself. Perhaps it would seem ordinary. A scattered storm, some drops falling on cracked earth, darkening the soil for the final time. No trumpets, no cataclysm, just a falling quiet. And when it ends, no more storms form again. The sky empties not in drama, but in transition, water lost to silence. The absence may stretch unnoticed at first, as if it were just another season of drought. But deep time confirms, clouds will not gather again. Geology holds fragments of such silences in miniature. Deserts formed in ancient epochs, dunes stretching where lakes once lived. Salt flats are themselves fossils of oceans, remnants of vanished rains. They carry the memory of water but none of its presence. To walk across them is to walk in the afterlife of rain, an echo of its rhythm that survives only as crystal and dust. Could it be that Earth itself will one day be covered in such plains, shimmering under heat, vastly silent where waves once sang? The final rains would also erase memory as much as stone does. Without water, fossils cease to form, for no sediment clings, no rivers bury bone. Without water, erosion ends, but so does preservation. The language of geology becomes altered forever. The Earth would continue as a dry basin, but its storytelling, its ability to record endings through sediment, would collapse. Silence in rain becomes silence in memory too. And yet, even as this image unsettles, it carries a strange calm. Page closing gently, not torn. Rain, after all, is never loud in its ending. A storm passes, drops slow, and suddenly we realize the roof no longer drums. The leaves no longer glisten. The final rain, scaled to planetary time, would echo this same quietness. Its ending is part of a rhythm larger than us, larger than even Earth, a rhythm tied to the sun, to stars, to thermodynamics itself. And so, when the final drop falls, it will not be tragedy or triumph. It will be transition. The Earth will still spin, still drift in orbit. But the sound of water will be gone, its silence endless, carrying forward into the ages that follow. And yet, if water can vanish so gently, if the sound of rain, so constant in our imaginations, can fall into silence forever, then what happens when even the sky itself, clouds and atmosphere together, are unmade in the fire of an expanding sun? For long before the stars scatter and galaxies drift apart in vast erasure, our own star will change, turning its benevolent glow into a swollen flame. The sun, now golden and steady, will redden. It will swell outward, first steadily, then exponentially, until its edges lick into the orbits of the innermost worlds. Mercury will be lost quickly, then Venus soon after, swallowed whole into a crimson furnace. And Earth will stand next, drawn closer with each expansion, bound to fire it cannot refuse. Imagine the sky then, not blue, not clouded, not even storm-filled, but glowing with heat, red and relentless. The atmosphere will thicken, then break apart. Oxygen will burn, nitrogen will scatter, molecules fractured and carried away. The shield of air that once made seas possible will unravel into space. Before the sun swallows Earth, the pale sky we know will have already burned, leaving behind a planet bare, cooked in radiation and stripped of all breath. If silence came first with vanished rains, what waits here is louder only in light, not in sound, for fire carries no noise in vacuum. It will be brightness without echo, flame without voice. Could it be that the most terrifying endings feel silent only because no one remains to hear them? The oceans, if any linger by then, will not survive. Their final molecules of water, already rare, will boil skyward with no hope of return. Even stone will sweat gases in such heat, minerals unbinding, the crust hissing with evaporation of its own compounds. Mountains will glow faintly, their outlines smudged by heat as if beginning to melt in place. The ground itself may buckle and twist, small rivers of magma cutting paths across fields that once held forests. Cities, if remnants still persist by pure accident, will be indistinguishable from rock, their outlines curling into shapes alien, then gone. Even fossils, those careful whispers of life, will be erased completely. For nothing can fossilize when temperatures liquefy all stone. The last archive of life become molten, merged into the body of the planet. This vision is not fantasy. It is written already in science, encoded in the rhythms of stellar evolution. The sun fuses hydrogen into helium in its core, and with time the balance shifts. Hydrogen thins, helium gathers heavier, hotter, changing the outer layers until expansion becomes inevitable. This is how stars age, not in sudden flare but in steady transformation. Our sun waits quietly, but its redness is already written, just as a tree holds its silence in its passing rings long before death. The timeline stretches billions of years beyond us, but time is patient. The fire comes, perhaps not noticed by the galaxy, but final for us. Other stars remind us what this looks like. Red giants already gleam in our skies, swollen embers that once were golden like our sun. They glow faint and wide, consuming their inner worlds without pause. We see them as distant, reassuringly abstract, but they are not abstract at all. They are the mirror hung before us. They are fire's rehearsal whispered into light, showing Earth's ending in advance, as if in kindness, as if to prepare us. Maybe the stars themselves are teachers, not in words, but in their transformations, their memory in light. When Earth is engulfed, no storm will remain. No wind, no tides, no seasons. Our most familiar rhythms, the tilting of equinox, the gathering of clouds, the breaking of dawn into rain, will no longer exist. The sun will replace them all with an unbroken brightness. Silence will spread to every layer, not because there is nothing, but because there is only flame, undifferentiated, immense, consuming. Could it be said, then, that endings themselves are not destruction, but the making of new silence? Perhaps what remains is not absence, but clarity too profound for memory. And yet, even this fire is temporary. After devouring what it can, the sun will shed its outer layers into space, trails of gas glowing for a moment like lanterns, drifting outward in expanding shells. The Earth, if not wholly swallowed, will be reduced to molten residue, chemical traces scattered, its crust warped and broken. What once sang with oceans will have become rock stripped of structure, drifting further toward night. Soon after, even the glowing shroud will fade, leaving only a white dwarf, dense and small, slowly cooling across billions of years. A single ember where once there was a furnace. Light, memory, brilliance, all reduced to silence glowing faintly into space. But woven into that end is yet another continuity. For in the shells of dust and gas shed by swollen stars, elements scatter. Carbon, oxygen, iron, calcium, the same materials that made oceans possible, that filled shells and bones and forests, will fly outward, joining interstellar clouds. Those clouds condense again, birthing new stars, new planets, new stories. Earth vanishes, but its ashes live on, recycled into other possible worlds. Perhaps elsewhere, other oceans bloom, other rains fall, other lives spark from the chemistry we once carried. Endings fold into beginnings too vast for us to witness. And so the sky burns not as conclusion but as transition, Earth erased in flame, yet its matter scattered to worlds we will never see. The silence beneath fire may not be final. It may only be a pause before new voices speak elsewhere. And yet, if fire can erase so fully, and yet scatter fragments back into cosmic possibility, then perhaps the truest ending is not in the sun's flame alone, but in what happens as the Earth itself exhales one last time. For worlds do not vanish in single instants. They dissolve gradually, melting from stone into fire, folding their memories back into plasma, carried outward and inward until nothing remains of surface or sky. The Earth, after billions of years of breath, oceans tightening and releasing, mountains rising, rivers falling to sea, will give one final release, one long exhale, unmaking itself into the same cosmos that once made it. As the sun swells further, the crust softens beneath the pressure of heat. Granite, basalt, limestone, all that remembered past climates, extinctions, the whispers of forests, loses their distinction. Minerals fuse into undifferentiated melt. The mountains that once measured eternity, Himalaya, Alps, Andes, are reduced in glow to nothing more than molten ripples, their long archives folded away into formlessness. Sediments that carried isotopic secrets of vanished atmospheres boil away. Fossils that captured endings are erased as easily as chalk in rain. Pages of Earth's deep library liquefy until letters, words, entire chapters dissolve silently into plasma. What once felt solid enough to last forever becomes only momentary glow, impossible to hold. Memory too, at least as Earth once kept it, unravels. For the crust was memory. The fossils were speech. The rocks were testimony. Without them, there is no archive left. Only atoms, loose and hot, untelling. Could it be that memory itself has a melting point, that no matter how patient, no matter how deeply etched, it too flows back into silence when heat surrounds it? When Earth exhales into fire, even memory liquefies into chemistry, a story lost not to time, but to physics. The oceans that once reflected stars are already gone, but their salts, their minerals, their shells long dissolved by creatures tiny and vast, follow in dissolution too. The iron in our blood, the calcium in our bones, the carbon from ancient forests, all are returned to plasma, glowing faint inside the swollen furnace of the sun slowly, indistinguishably, The Earth itself becomes indistinguishable, its substance carried into the fusion's outer shroud. No longer planet, no longer anchored body. Only material, ready to be scattered outward in the sun's next exhalation. For the sun itself, bloated and unstable in redness, will also breathe. It will scatter its outer layers into glowing nebula, shimmering in shells across light years. Earth, already melted, will be part of this dispersal. Its rocks and seas and cities and dreams will be rendered unrecognizable in dust clouds drifting across interstellar dark. Atoms once in mountain peaks may join new gas. Elements once in forests may seed new planets. Perhaps, far away and far ahead, another Earth-like world builds itself partially from the exhaled fragments of our own. Matter becomes memory again in other places, remembering differently, through entirely new lives that will never know ours. And this is the wonder. Endings on one scale are beginnings on another. Entropy dictates dissolution, but in that dissolution, dispersal occurs, feeding the cosmos with the very materials of life. The Earth's long exhale is not only an ending, it is contribution, a final offering to the processes that formed it long before us. We imagine loss, but nature imagines circulation. We imagine silence, but perhaps the universe interprets this scattering as continuation, vast and voiceless, but continuation nonetheless. What does it mean for memory to drift as plasma? Does memory need form to be real, or is existence enough? Perhaps the trace of Earth, carried to another system, shaping another crust, seeding another ocean, is memory with no archive, recognition without witness. Maybe memory is not always about remembering. It is about carrying on, endlessly transformed. The exhaled atoms make language unnecessary and permanence irrelevant. In their scattering, they confirm that nothing is erased completely. It only changes its scale, its context, its place. So Earth, once wrapped in oceans and forests, now dissolves completely back into elemental form. This last gesture is to release, to return. The long exhale folds the page and hands it back to the cosmos. And in that giving, the planet closes its story not with violence, but with diffusion, unmaking itself as gently and fully as a breath. And yet, if Earth can exhale into the cosmos, vanishing so completely into new beginnings elsewhere, then what of the final moment when even that exhalation is done? When no voice, no presence, no witness remains? What does it mean for a planet to say goodbye in solitude, to close its story without anyone left to hear? We often imagine endings as ceremonies, something noticed, something marked. But perhaps the universe is quieter than that. Perhaps the truth is that endings need no witness at all. The Earth does not require eyes to be lost. Its vanishing is its own, whether seen or unseen. Already, the long goodbye has begun. We notice only fractions of it. Oceans shifting at their edges, ice retreating and returning, forests eroded into plains, species lost so quickly their names hardly have time to be spoken. The traces that remind us, tidal lines stretching higher, carbon etched into ice cores, isotopes trapped in sediment, are already part of this farewell. The great departure is not sudden flame alone in the future. It is measured in waves ending earlier, in deserts growing further, in the quiet thinning of lives that once seemed countless. The Earth has been rehearsing its goodbye for as long as it has lived. Each fossil is an ending, each dust layer a silence, each geologic fold a record of what has gone and will never return. The seas are often called eternal, yet even they speak of departure. Their tides are slowing subtly, as the moon itself drifts outward inch by inch. Someday, too far for us to grasp, the ocean's rhythm will falter. What is now a steady breath will become still solitude. Imagine a world where tides have no pull, no heartbeat against the shore. That alone is goodbye written in gravity, unnoticed because no one will stand by then upon the coast to count the waves. Entropy does its work not only in collapse, but in the stretching apart of things that once touched, the hush of systems unwinding softly into absence. The fossils remind us of infinite departures already past. Whole lineages ended, skeletal traces abandoned mid-story. Trilobites once covered the sea floor, ammonites once swam in teeming swirls, Forests of dragonflies once pulsed in air thick with oxygen. All gone, all ended, vanishing without mourners, without remembrance save what chance preserved in stone. And could it be that the same waits for us? That our story too, when folded into dust and sediment, will linger not as memory but simply as evidence, noticed perhaps, but more likely anonymous, indistinguishable? The earth carries eulogies in silence already. Each fossil is both grave and whisper, testimony of farewell spoken without ears to hear. Even light betrays endings in progress. Photons escape our skies, bearing reflections of oceans, forests, clouds. They travel outward regardless of our presence, silent messengers of Earth as it is now. Most of that light will never meet an eye, never be received, never be decoded. It will wander until stretched apart by the expansion of space, its memory diluted into wavelength too faint to be read. But does that matter? Must light be observed to have existed? Perhaps this is the quiet beauty of endings, that they do not depend on presence to be real. A goodbye without witness is still a goodbye. A sigh once exhaled does not demand to be heard. There is humility in realizing this. So much of our grief at the idea of planetary ending is bound in the assumption that it needs us. That the earth falls silent because we cannot speak of it. But silence exists regardless. The forests will vanish whether we tell their story. The seas will fade whether we measure their tides. The stars will expand whether or not we map their cycles. Endings belong to the universe, not to us. Our presence notices them briefly, but does not grant them legitimacy. The Earth has ended countless times already, through asteroid strike, through volcanic flood, through ice smotherings, and each time, no witness was needed for the farewell to be complete. Could it be, then, that goodbyes belong more to the endings themselves than to any who record them? The world does not require an audience. It only requires time. And time keeps its promises. Rivers cut valleys, glaciers carve ridges, entropy eats at structures, and silence always arrives. Perhaps that is the gentlest truth of all. Endings are not diminished when unnoticed. They do not fade into meaninglessness because no eye is there to hold the last glance. They are complete regardless. To be forgotten is not to have not existed. To go unwitnessed is simply to end honestly, folded into the deeper rhythm of things. So when the earth itself dissolves in fire, or whether earlier it had frozen in stillness, there may be no mourners, no cries, not even memory of memory. And yet the goodbye would be full all the same, carried in the last glow of molten stone, in the final dispersion of atmosphere, in the scattering of atoms into stellar grave. Too often we bind significance to whether anyone remains to notice it. But perhaps the earth whispers differently. Significance lies in happening at all. It softens us to imagine the earth's ending not as drama, not as tragedy, but as release. Oceans exhaled into space, forests translated into stone, mountains folded into magma. Each disappearance was already underway for ages, each moment already goodbye. The final departure is only the last of many, a closing gesture that continues what has always been true. That all things pass, that none require witness, that silence itself is the most universal companion. And yet, if endings need no witness, if everything that falls into silence is still complete in itself, then what becomes of beginnings? Who notices when they arrive, in just as much quiet, written softly into stone, dust, and the first stirrings of water?